picture. The real big St. Louis sports picture. It's BK and Ferrario on 101 ESPN.
On the ice for the final 13 seconds. The Blues needed back-to-back wins against Calgary. And you can bring out the Zamboni. They got it. A good 4-1 win tonight. And the St. Louis Blues have moved themselves to within 1 point of a playoff spot with two massive home wins in a row.
We need to go on a streak. That's just the reality of it. You know, we just can't be satisfied that we beat Calgary twice and then go on the road and not play well.
Utah clears it all the way down. Fowler's going to go get it. The time's going to wind down on this one. And once again, the Blues left wondering, how do you win three in a row? 4-2 the final, and a disappointing game here at the Delta Center in Utah.
We got some good teams coming in, a lot of Western Conference teams too, so it's an opportunity for us to try to win some home games, get some home wins for sure. Play our style, play our game, and then either make up some ground or try to pull away from some
tough
teams.
homestand for the St. Louis Blues. Unable to follow up a really solid victory in Vegas. The Blues fall 3 straight on home ice.
I look at it as us. It's the coaches with the players and how we're dealing with adversity. We haven't succeeded yet in dealing with adversity.
A long open, but I feel like it took you on the roller coaster of what this last week and a half has been. Welcome, everyone, into a Wednesday edition of BK and Ferrario, along with Bradford Bruns and Grant Francis, both guys coming out of the bullpen, of course, as BK is on vacation. T-Bone is dealing with a little bit of an illness, so we got the two guys coming out of the bullpen, and a great group to be in on this one today. And we are with you up on our YouTube channel at 101 ESPN STL. Our studio cams brought to you by the Air Alliance team. You can also get in on the conversation today on our Air Comfort Service text line, 314-399-9646. I had that long open for you because I'm asking myself last night after I listened through the Doug Armstrong press conference and Jim Montgomery speaking with the media and Braden Shen speaking with the media, how did this Blues team get there? How did they get to the point to where they were coming off of a game against the Calgary Flames riding the ultimate high? You heard that crowd chanting, "Let's go Blues." The Braden Shen cut of saying we can't just be satisfied with this, and then laying the egg in Utah. And with the exception of that shootout win against the Vegas Golden Knights, you could be staring down a 5-game losing streak for this St. Louis Blues team. And then you get to the point where Brandon Saad is put on waivers, and Doug Armstrong is talking about where this team is at. And to me, fellas, after hearing Doug Armstrong's comments yesterday, Brandon Saad was the first shot. The president of hockey operations initiated the first shot for this team by saying, this player is not playing well enough for us, so he, who is a established veteran, a guy who has multiple Stanley Cups, is going through waivers. He's not scoring for us. He's not generating enough help to benefit our team offensively. So we're putting Alex Texier in the lineup. And Alex Texier is a guy who's been on the fourth line. He's been on the top line. He's been in and out of the lineup. But Doug Armstrong said, I'd rather see what this guy can offer us in terms of potentially winning or what he does for us in the next couple of years than keep Brandon Saad in and out of the lineup. And to me, just like in 2018-19 when they fired Mike Yeo and brought in Craig Berube, just like he had a press conference in November a couple of years ago in the middle of an 8-game losing streak and said, everything's fine, we're not firing the head coach, this was the warning shot. This was the warning shot of, if this continues, something is going to change drastically. And it can't happen in the middle of the season. It's going to have to wait until the end of the season. But he laid the seed, and now it's going to be, what does your team respond with going out on the road?
Yeah, and I mean, you go back to last season, and, you know, even when Craig Berube was fired and you had Doug Armstrong kind of say, you got to start eliminating variables. And first it was the assistant coaches the year after, you know, the first year where things sort of went downhill. And then you had Craig Berube fired and you started eliminating variables. Well, you're at the point now where you've picked up players off of waivers. You've traded for players like Cam Fowler. You've even gone to the length of having two very successful offer sheets where you brought in two very good players. And it still is. You're in the same spot as last year. Like Doug Armstrong's press conference yesterday and how he was talking, it felt like the way he talked about that Nashville game last year.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Where, the Blues had just come off of a 5-game win streak. They had that loss against the Columbus Blue Jackets on home ice, but then they won a couple more. They had Nashville coming home when the Blues were in a playoff spot. At that time, they were 6 games above 500, and then they just didn't show up.
Yeah.
And that's what this last homestand felt like for the Blues. And at some point, when you're doing the same thing for a calendar year, the difference is last year it felt like a step in the right direction. Like you got Drew Bannister, you're starting to put some wins together. Like it feels like you're going in the right direction. But now it's been a year of the same thing where it's just up and down, up and down. And especially this season, obviously, not being able to get to 3 wins in a row, there comes a point in time where you have to start making decisions on your roster. And this feels like the first step of that. Hopefully you get a response from the team. But again, if you go through the rest of this season, going up and down on this seesaw like the Blues have had, this is the first sign that the roster is now going to be the part of the team that is changing.
Yeah, exactly. The real personnel. And yesterday did feel very much like that classic opening salvo, something that Doug Armstrong has not wanted to make a habit. That is not commonplace for him. It hasn't been in the past. It's not conceivably going to be moving forward. But Grant, you referenced as much, and Alex as well. We've had stretches, we have had fits and bursts this season, but we keep circling back to the common theme or the common denominator. That's great. You went through the expected new coach bump. You thought that things were getting better from a structural standpoint following the acquisition of a Cam Fowler, even Robert Thomas during the month of December. You have had stretches, but it keeps coming back to that key word that begins with the C, and that is consistency. So now, having said from Doug Armstrong's standpoint, he said on the day that Jim Montgomery was brought in, basically, speaking of variables and so forth, we don't have any qualms, we don't have any questions moving forward now about the guy who is at the helm of this roster, of this organization, this team. You have your coach in place. You tried to trot out Brandon Saad on numerous occasions, and this goes well beyond the lack of offensive production all season. To this point, yes, he has been commendable in the Blues uniform, but at this point in time, here you are at the tail end of January, and you are mired really in another uninspired stretch of hockey. So what gives? Doug Armstrong clearly yesterday, he made it very clear, abundantly clear, that Texier, among others, it is time to start seeing what these guys can do with more tangible ice time. And now eliminating that one variable of a Brandon Saad, provided that he is unclaimed today by the time that waivers roll around, that process actually concludes at 1 p.m. It gives you a better understanding, one would hope, of what a guy like Texier and others can actually offer to this equation, because what you've been doing clearly hasn't worked over the long haul this season.
So I spent a lot of time last night trying to make a comp with another team in the NHL, because believe it or not, this doesn't happen a lot, to where you've got a team that has a young core of players that they view as the next group that's taking them into the playoffs, and then it doesn't work, and then all of a sudden you're veering in a different direction. And that's the ultimate terrible situation where you have to get to that point. And by no means am I going to be Chicken Little today talking about the sky is falling. But if you get to that point, because look, when Doug Armstrong's talking about your top 6, your best players not being consistent and having to really wonder if you're evaluating how they fit into the team correctly, that's where you go. The only thing that I could come up with is the New York Rangers. And I brought this up to you guys. They had Kevin Hayes, Pavel Buchnevich, JT Miller, Matt Zuccarello. That was their core when they traded for Mika Zibanejad. And then in a matter of 2 years, they traded away JT Miller. They traded away Kevin Hayes, obviously traded away a Pavel Buchnevich, and they brought in an Artemi Panarin. They let a lot of the younger kids that they had on their team take over as the leaders. And then after that, you had a couple of top picks, Capo Caco, Alexis Lafreniere, and then you've got a new group of people. And it's the only comp I can come up with where a team veered in a different direction when they said, nope, this group's not getting it done for us. You missed the playoffs for a couple of years, and then since I think it was the year 2018, if I'm not mistaken, they've made the playoffs every single year. This was Doug Armstrong's comment yesterday when he was asked, what can you do in this situation?
Observe.
we are building for something in the future. We are excited about our participation in the World Junior. We're excited about how guys are playing in the American League right now. We're not going to use those type of assets to improve or hope to improve on this team. We're all making statements on where we're at in the league. So what I can do is just try and observe, try and work with Alex, try and work with Monty, try and push these guys to be the best they can be and see where it goes.
I think it's important to understand the middle part of what he said there. He said, we're not going to be trading guys that are a part of our future to fix the now. We're going to observe. And I think so many people have been stuck on since he said that yesterday, and I've seen a ton of these comments on my Twitter account. Well, he's observing Thomas and Kyrou and Buchnevich, and if they don't play well, he's going to trade them. Maybe. I mean, it's very obvious he's talked about the top players not playing. But Doug Armstrong's also talking, I'm going to observe the National Hockey League. Like he observed last year until the Broberg and the Holloway situation became apparent and said, we can pounce on this. It's going to be a lot of observing. And think of the inner circle that he has. Pete Chiarelli, Al McInnes, Keith Tkachuk, Ken Hitchcock, Jim Montgomery now. He's talking to these guys to find out what's gone wrong. Have we evaluated something incorrectly? How do we veer in a different direction if this doesn't work? But it's not just observing his own guys. It's observing the NHL to find out, is there something out there that benefits the Blues? And that's where it starts with the play of this team. And that's why I go back to, he initiated the first shot yesterday. He said, Brandon Saad's going on waivers. We're going to find out what some of these younger guys look like in our system, being an Alex Texier, being a Zach Bolduc in our top six consistently. There's no more variables to keep these guys out. And if that doesn't work, then the AHL guys are going to get a chance. And if that still doesn't work, then we're going to start looking at the outside. So that's what I really think these final 31 games are going to be. It's a warning shot to find out, how do we observe this team?
It's hard because you see a guy like Jordan Kyrou. In the last 2 seasons, really 3 seasons, all everybody wanted to do is trade him. You know, he wasn't good enough defensively. He was putting up points, but his plus minus was awful.
Yeah.
And now this season, he's the least of everybody's worries. He's been probably your best forward on the team. So you look at what Jordan Kyrou's done, and now if everybody wants to get on the train of, you know, trade Pavel Buchnevich, trade Robert Thomas, maybe this team does need a core shakeup. But you saw Jordan Kyrou improve himself. Nobody really had as much of an issue with Robert Thomas or Pavel Buchnevich last year. It was all Jordan Kyrou. Mm-hmm. So are you going to risk now potentially parting ways with one of those 2 players and then watching them have a better season like Jordan Kyrou did this year? Because I don't think, you know, we're looking at this 3-game stretch right now as if the sky is falling, which it hasn't looked good.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you take Robert Thomas for the whole season, he's been pretty decent. Like, right. He's had some really good stretches. This is a really bad stretch for him, yes. But he's had good stretches. And last season, we were talking about him, you know, should be in the Selke conversation. And now this season, it's been a fall off. Do you want to really look at exposing him to a trade, or do you want to wait it out and hope he gets back to where he was? It's so hard to not be captivated by the moment, especially when it's now 3 years that the Blues have been in this sort of spot.
Yeah.
But you also kind of have to have a little bit of patience with these things, because what's really going to hurt is if you do end up trading him and then he does return to form, and then you're like, why did we do that?
Yeah, and we'll get into the patience side of things in the 12 o'clock hour, because you're absolutely correct, Grant. We had a couple of mic drops yesterday talking about that of, well, you got to ship them all out and bring new guys in. That is opening up a whole nother can of worms that puts your team in a worse spot. So you don't want to jump to conclusions in that one, and that's why you try and not chicken little this thing and say all of a sudden it's awful and you need to start a full-blown rebuild. So we'll get into that patience side of things. Chris Kerber is going to join us at 12:30 today, voice of the Blues, get his thoughts on evaluating what Doug Armstrong said yesterday at the press conference. And we're also going to have Greg Wyshynski joining us in about 15 minutes of ESPN.com NHL Insider. Grant Francis, Bradford Bruns, I'm Alex Ferrario. Coming up next, I want to veer a little Cardinals direction, because we were going to get into this yesterday, and then of course the news took place of Brandon Saad going on waivers. But Ivan Herrera, the Cardinals had the Zips projection pop out of where their team is at. And Ivan Herrera is a really interesting one. Should we be putting him in the same conversation as 2 of these other young core pieces? We'll get to that and this NL Central race next on 101 ESPN.
Start your day with a morning after on 101 ESPN. Get in the know first on everything St. Louis sports with Tim McKernan, Doug Vaughn, and Martin Kilcoy. Listen to TMA weekday mornings from 7 to 11 a.m. on 101 ESPN. The morning after is presented by Brown and Crouppen Law Firm. We're right back to more of it. It's BK and Ferrario on 101 ESPN.
I'm seeing a lot of these on our Air Comfort Service text line 314-399-9646 of, oh, it's easy, do this to change the team, do that. I'm going to throw this back at everybody. Send us a mic drop, a Scott Lee Heating Company mic drop on our 101 ESPN app, which is brought to you by Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers. Send us a mic drop. You're in this situation. You're Doug Armstrong. How do you fix this? What do you do? Because I genuinely am curious what people think the easy route would be to fix this problem for the Blues. So send us that mic drop on the Scott Lee Heating Company mic drop over on the 101 ESPN app. Greg Wyshynski of ESPN.com is going to join us in about 10 minutes or so. But I did want to bring this up Cardinals-wise because the Zips projections were out, and we all know how good the Zips projections are and how exciting people get with baseball season. Maybe not so much for the Cardinals lately. But we had this topic yesterday that we just didn't get to, and I wanted to bring it back. Ivan Herrera. We talk so much, fellas, about Jordan Walker, Mason Winn, Nolan Gorman. These are the core pieces for the Cardinals next year in terms of what gets them back into the competitive race. Those are the guys that are probably the 5 most important Cardinals on the team. Should we be putting Ivan Herrera in that conversation? Because over on Fangraphs, they had this 80th, 20th percentile in terms of ranking the players in 80th percentile in Major League Baseball in certain categories versus where they're 20th percentile. And for Ivan Herrera, he's the 80th percentile in batting average, on-base percentage, slugging, OPS plus, and WAR. These are the players that are just slightly above him. Nolan Gorman, Alec Burleson, Lars Dupar, Brendan Donovan, Wilson Contreras, Mason Winn. I understand there's a lot of skepticism of if Ivan Herrera is going to be playing, going into the lineup as a catcher. Does Pedro Paez get more opportunities? I personally think Ivan Herrera needs to be in these same conversations. I don't trust the playing time. I don't think he's going to get there, but that bat certainly plays. If we're talking about a guy who last season had 254 plate appearances and hit .301 with a slugging percentage of .428 and an OPS plus of 124, Ivan Herrera should be in the same conversation as a Walker, Gorman, and Mason Winn this upcoming season.
I don't disagree with you one bit. My whole problem, unfortunately, Alex, does come down to the playing time. And I guess that we will cross that bridge when we get to it. But right here, right now, as we sit in late January, I cannot guarantee that you're going to see considerably more than 72 games from this young man in 2025. And therein lies the rub, because we saw it last spring and last summer, guys, especially in the first half. Grant, recall some of those instances in which when Herrera was in the lineup, when he was taking over, when he had the baton temporarily for Wilson Contreras, we knew at that point in time, okay, this isn't somebody who's going to make insane waves from a defensive standpoint. He's not necessarily handling the staff in the way that you would like. He's not throwing runners out with any regularity, but he was hitting and he was thundering the baseball. He was in the top half of the order, and you were relying on him when he was there to be a run producer. I just don't know how the shakedown is going to unfold this year between Herrera and Paez, because this has been an organization that has been so reliant on having that mainstay defensively behind the plate. You went away from it for 1 year with Wilson Contreras. Now we see that he's been moved to first base. So I'm only skeptical about not how the bat will play, but rather, are we going to see the bat play enough to really justify the expectations?
Yeah, that's the hard part. And I think, if you're the Cardinals, you really want to play Ivan Herrera because of that bat. But, the more you play him and you see the defensive mistakes that happen, then you almost get forced into wanting to play Paez over him, even though you do want the bat of Herrera in the lineup every day at catcher. It's just one of those things where, what do you need more at the time? Do you need a bat, or do you need a catcher that's going to play defense well enough?
Yeah. And that's going to come down to the mentality of the Cardinals. And my concern, and we've talked about this before, is they're going to view this as, well, we need to win. And what's the best route for us to win? It's going to be defense first. And that's when you see the Paez in the lineup. That's when you see the Michael Cianis in the outfield, and you see less playing time for certain players. But I'm going to take them at their word to where they say we need to see these younger players and find out. And that's why, as much as we talk about the Jordan Walker in the outfield, Ivan Herrera's bat plays. Ivan Herrera last season, for small chunks of time, was a middle-of-the-order bat for you. Is it the ideal middle-of-the-order bat? Absolutely not. I think a lot of people's middle-of-the-order bat is pop. But Ivan Herrera, if you're talking about a guy who's going to be getting on base at like a 500 clip and 124 OPS plus, and specifically when you're talking about a batting average of 300, you can take an offensively dynamic roster with young players and try and build off of that. The problem is going to be how much leash does he have? Because at some point, and you yank that backwards and say, well, no, we're not winning, we need some defense. That's when you can stunt that development.
No, and frankly, I do not care whether he's belting the ball out of the yard, out of Busch Stadium with regularity, but are you driving the baseball consistently? And we did see that to a pretty good degree last season. That is the type of production that you want to see. Now, interestingly, I think, because right now we still have to operate under the premise that Nolan Arenado is on this roster. Let's say that we linger for a few more weeks. We're there when pitchers and catchers report February 12th, for crying out loud. Where does Herrera, if indeed you are actually rolling with him, let's say behind the plate on day number 1, you're going for that upside because your offense is going to need it accordingly as well. Where does he hit for you in this current order? Would you be comfortable slotting him in, for instance, right after cleanup, maybe even leading into that? Because his ability, his skill set screams middle of the order to me, much more so actually than some of those guys like Gorman, Walker, whom we discuss as well, because we simply saw more consistency last year at the plate out of Herrera.
It's going to be a fun top 20 most important Cardinals players that BK Tanner and I are going to be putting together very soon, because I promise you it's not going to fall in line with what a lot of people probably expect for this upcoming season.
Here's something from the 618 that I totally agree with, and this is what I was thinking. His defense can't allow more runs than his bat produces. He's a huge liability behind the plate. That's the key for him. He can make mistakes, but is his bat making up for those mistakes? Yeah. If not, then he's not going to get the playing time.
That's where Ollie's decision is really going to come heavily into play, because you obviously can't go into a long losing skid for a team that's trying to develop these younger players. It's going to be a healthy balance of what they're trying to accomplish this season. Graham Francis, Bradford Bruns, I'm Alex Ferrario. We'll get to your questions in about 15 minutes or so. You send them over on our Air Comfort Service text line 314-399-9646. But we'll get back to the Blues. Greg Wyshynski, ESPN.com is next here on 101 ESPN.
101 ESPN is powered by Kaufman Townsley St. Louis's injury lawyers. Call 314-500-5000.
Tune in this Friday from 11 to 2 as BK and Ferrario broadcast live from the E&B Granite Studios at the Centene Community Ice Center. E&B Granite, Bernie Federko's only choice for granite countertops, cabinets, and flooring. Saturday morning at 10:30. It's a college basketball doubleheader on ESPN. Game 1, Tennessee and Florida. Game 2, Duke and North Carolina. The NCAA plays on 101 ESPN. 101 ESPN Sports Center.
Waiting game with waivers. I'm Bradford Brunson. Your SportsCenter update is driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. Yesterday, the Blues placed veteran forward Brandon Saad on waivers. If unclaimed by this afternoon at 1 p.m., he will head to AHL Springfield. St. Louis currently sits 5 points back of that second wildcard spot. Hoops, Lou snags another big conference victory, 78-69 over VCU. Gibson Jimerson went off for 26 points, playing 39 minutes. This SportsCenter update was driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
This is exactly where you want to be, listening to us. It's BK and Ferrario on 101 ESPN.
Along with Graham Francis and Bradford Bruns, I'm Alex Ferrario. It is BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. We'll do questions and answers coming up in our next segment. You can send your questions over to us at our Air Comfort Service text line, 314-399-9646. But now we got questions for one of my favorites. He is Greg Wyshynski, senior NHL writer over at ESPN. Always love getting to talk Blues and NHL perspective with our guy, Greg. Always appreciate it, my man. This has been one wild roller coaster ride for Blues fans this season. And I am genuinely curious your thoughts, Greg. When you saw Brandon Saad's name on waivers yesterday, what was your reaction?
My reaction was to check his recent ice time to find out exactly how things had been trending for him. I mean, admittedly, like when I checked the waiver email that some of us get, I was fairly surprised to see his name on there. But you know, it makes sense. I mean, it's the time of year when you are hoping that teams can, you know, maybe pare down your payroll a little bit by claiming a veteran player that they believe can help them. You know, he's a guy that I don't necessarily know is going to bring, you know, too much of a return back via trade and all that stuff too. So it's like, you know, and on top of that, he's got trade protection as well. So, you know, when you dig into it, it makes sense a little bit insofar as seeing why they're going that route with him. But still a surprise to see a name that big on the waiver wire. Usually the waiver wire is reserved for who is that guy type players, and we know who Brandon Saad is.
You know, back in December, Greg, and I believe we had you on our show and we were talking just about, you know, like starting to make a little bit more strides, starting to play a little bit more consistently. They bring in Jim Montgomery. It felt like the Blues were starting to figure something out. And then January, just a complete train halt. The brakes immediately hit. When you see that Doug Armstrong's talking yesterday, and when you see kind of some of the tweets coming out from guys like Jeremy Rutherford and Lou Korak and where the Blues have fallen, does it surprise you that they've taken this step backwards, or did you kind of expect this at some point?
No, I mean, a little bit of a surprise, only because, you know, Jim Montgomery is pretty adept at kind of building a foundation under a team to get them towards a playoff spot. And so, you know, you look at their last 10 games, for example, they're like 4-6. They're very middle of the pack when it comes to expected goals percentage at 5-on-5. They're very middle of the pack when it comes to puck possession. Like there are certain things that you'd expect this team to have gotten a little bit better at under Montgomery that hasn't necessarily happened. And then obviously, like throughout the season, you know, the offensive struggles for this team have, I think, really been an issue insofar as them being, I think, in like the bottom third of the league in goals per game. You know, Montgomery's teams have never exactly been a stalwart offensive juggernaut, but there's some talent on this team that you'd expect them to be a little bit better than where they are.
Greg, when you look at this team, it's been the last 3 years really eliminating variables, trying to get better, and they brought in a lot of players in the offseason, a lot of veteran players, and you know, you're getting down to the point now where a lot of people are starting to look at the core of players and wondering if these guys are the guys that can get it done. When you look at the Blues core, what are your thoughts on, you know, now it's been 3 seasons that they really haven't been able to put things together. What's your opinion on the players that are in the Blues core? And, if you were in charge of this team, what would be sort of the way you look at, going forward with these players?
Well, it depends on how we define the core. Let's start there. To me, the core is obviously begins with Thomas and Kyrou. Two guys that are now in their mid-20s, two guys that are obviously signed for a very long time. And it's a good starting point. And then, you bring in, you have a Jake Neighbors and others, that you can count in that core. I think Holloway is probably in that core too. And obviously that's a move that has certainly helped, benefited the Blues this season insofar as Doug Armstrong having been aggressive with that offer sheet and getting a player that has blossomed, I think, this year. This is probably the worst fear for the Oilers, seeing how good he is offensively and knowing how good he could have been, skating with Draisaitl or McDavid if they had matched the offer sheet. But the other, I say the core thing because the problem is that you also have this other core of players, Brandon Saad being one of them, that have all of this trade protection. So if you wanted to kind of change the makeup of this team by dealing away, let's say, a Colton Parayko or someone like that, well, they've got a full no trade clause. And there's a number of other guys in this roster that have that sort of protection as well. So you have a core of talented players I think you can certainly build around foundationally, but then you have an entire other core of players that maybe in a perfect world you're moving to make over your roster, get some assets towards the future and really kind of aggressively change the makeup of this team. But because they have such control over their next destinations, it's really hard to do that.
Well, I want to ask about one player, too, that's really come under fire from fans and just gotten a lot of talk around the media. And one player that you didn't mention right there is Pavel Buchnevich, who just signed that extension this past offseason. When you look at Pavel Buchnevich, he hasn't had the type of season he's wanted. When you look at him and you talk about this core group of players, how do you see a Pavel Buchnevich?
That's a really good question. He's he's on the precipice, like you said, of a pretty large extension. I think he's a player that certainly has a lot of value in this league. I know there were certainly teams, hoping to acquire him in recent years and add him to their top six. Things didn't work out, but he's a player with value. But again, I think when it comes down to it, for a lot of these players and does one off season portend things for the future? Can you count on that player as being part of the core? They're going to have to make some decisions as to who they think is part of the solution, who they think is part of the problem, and then figure out what they can maybe get for that player if he is part of the problem to help the team rebuild in the next couple of years.
We're talking with Greg Wyshynski of ESPN senior writer. Greg, I was trying to do this last night after Doug Armstrong talked, just trying to think of, maybe a team of the past that had a core in place and they saw it and they said, look, this just isn't working. We've got to veer in a different direction. Does a team come to mind to you? Because the best example I could come up with was the New York Rangers in the middle of those years that they were struggling.
Yeah, when they sent a letter to their fans about how
a rebuild,
how tough it was going to be to rebuild, and then immediately added Artemi Panarin and Adam Fox.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Yeah, because they're the Rangers, and that's the advantage the Rangers have is people want to play in New York. Hell, we just saw Colorado do it. They just traded away a pretty. They're the third best player on the team. With the notion that they didn't want to pay him money. It's not that they couldn't afford him, and it's not that he wouldn't have resigned. It's that they looked at Mikko Rantanen and said, well, we've got so much other stuff to address on our roster to become a real championship team again that we can't commit that percentage of the salary cap to just three players, him, Makar, and McKinnon. So off he goes, and comes Martin Necas, and then they kind of will act accordingly. So it happens all the time in the league. If you go through a few years where you don't win, you get aggressive. You try to tear it down or retool and kind of go from there. And listen, you look at the ages on this roster for a lot of these guys and how long they've been here, and the diminishing returns that Doug Armstrong's getting with this roster. It probably is time to get a bit more aggressive with the scalpel. But as we talked about earlier, you can only do so much when you've offered so much trade protection to some of the players that you'd like to ship out to do a more dramatic retool to the roster.
The opening that they have, Greg, and I'm curious from the national perspective, the opening is the no trade clause doesn't kick in for a Thomas and Kyrou until July 1st. Pavel Buchnevich, a modified no trade clause. If it were to get to that point where the Blues look at this, it continues to go south the rest of the way, and they say, we've got an issue with our top six. Would there be interest around the National Hockey League for guys like Thomas, Kyrou, and Buchnevich with their contract attached?
Yeah, I think I will say without question that there would be interest in someone acquiring Robert Thomas. Like, Robert Thomas is an elite center, in my opinion, and I think that there are teams that look at their middle of the lineup and their top six who would desperately try to acquire Robert Thomas to fill in a spot. Like, could you imagine him behind McKinnon in Colorado or any number of places that could use a center? My God, like, Boston would fall over themselves trying to make a trade with St. Louis if they could get Thomas to fill a middle that's still cavernous with the retirements of Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci. So, I mean, if you're looking for like maximum value, I think Thomas is top of the list for me. Kyrou obviously is a very special player, great goal scorer, and there's probably a number of teams that would love to pair him up with their top guy and get results. But for me, like, if you're looking for, what could we get the most for, having Thomas available and having him controllable with that contract, I think would be top of the list.
So with all this being said, Greg, obviously the Blues had a lot of aspirations to make the playoffs this year, and whether that happens or not, you take a big outlook, a step back on this team. How do you feel about the future of this team with, some of the prospects that should be coming up here in the next few years? Obviously, there are a lot of Blues fans that are excited about some of the young players down in the minors and college. How do you feel about the outlook on this team next year and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, the pipeline's pretty good. No doubt about that. I think there's definitely some reason to get excited about the future, not only what's on the roster, but what's on the way. They have like a 12% chance of making the playoffs right now. And the problem, I think, for them is the problem that's facing Vancouver and Utah and the Flames, which is that we're down to one spot, basically. Like, the Blues are not rallying to get into the top three in the Central. You could probably assign one of the wild cards to Colorado. I think even without Rantanen, they're going to be good enough to make the cut. So you're basically on the one spot, and that's tough. That's tough sledding ahead. And as we've seen in the past, when Doug Armstrong feels as if his team isn't going to make the cut, he can get aggressive and start trading off assets that makes the team even weaker. As far as like what the outlook looks like, look, they've started to kind of change over their blue line, which to me has always been one of the primary issues of this team in the post Alex Pietrangelo years, which is a bunch of players of various degrees of effectiveness that you couldn't get off the blue line because they're trade protection. At least they've done some things to try to make over that group slightly with the Fowler deal. And so, they're inching towards the right direction, but overall, I mean, it's not a championship caliber team. And I think they know that. And I think that they have to be aggressive in trying to make it one, or, take a step back for a couple of years as the young players filter in and hope that the sum of those parts ends up being better than what it is now.
Greg, always appreciate the time, my man. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of this week going into the Four Nations tournament in a couple weeks, and we'll catch up probably after that once we get closer to the trade deadline.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks for having me.
There you go. Greg Wyshynski, he's one of my favorites, ESPN senior NHL writer, and, of course, the Puck Daddy that I always like to reference, and that's where he got the start, Puck Daddy blog with Greg Wyshynski. There is one thing I wanted to react to that he mentioned and kind of throw your guys' way, and I'll also get to the questions on our Air Comfort Service text line, 314-399-9646, and you can also send them over on our YouTube chat at 101 ESPN STL. Our studio cam is brought to you by Air Alliance Team. We'll get the questions and answers next here on 101 ESPN.
You can now watch 101 ESPN live on our Air Alliance Team studio cams. Catch every show live on our YouTube channel or at 101ESPN.com. 101 ESPN studio cams.
Presented by the Air Alliance Team Heating and Cooling. Getting the job done quickly, correctly, 100% of the time.
St. Louis. It's BK and Ferrario on 101 ESPN. You've got questions, we may have the answers. Maybe. It's BK and Ferrario's questions and answers on 101 ESPN.
314-399-9646. That is our Air Comfort Service text line. Also, our YouTube channel, 101 ESPN STL. The studio cam is brought to you by Air Alliance Team. We just finished talking with Greg Wyshynski of ESPN.com. Chris Kerber is going to join us at 12:30. But I want to start off questions and answers with the question that Greg Wyshynski kind of threw at us. When you asked him, Grant, about the core of players, and he said, well, I guess you kind of have to ask, who's the core? Because you have a young core that starts with Thomas and Kyrou, like he mentioned, and then you've got an older core. That's the Colton Parayko's, the Braden Shens, the Jordan Binningtons. My biggest question, and what I think the Blues are banking on right now, and I just kind of threw this together because I was curious, their top nine, if you were to look at the Blues and say, ideally in the next couple of years, what is your top nine? It includes Holloway, Thomas, Snuggerud, Buchnevich, Dvorsky, Kyrou, Neighbors, Shen, Bolduc. I think they would tell you on Truth Serum that's our ideal top nine. I'm not even as concerned about the older core because, like, Parayko's playing well this season. Binnington, we'll get into this in the 1 o'clock hour. Despite people's frustration with him and what his numbers say, he's actually been playing pretty well for the Blues. Just one area that he struggled in. It really comes down to this younger core. And like when you look at what Greg Wyshynski asked, sure, there's some patience that need to be in play with the Bolduc and the Neighbors and the Snuggerud and the Dvorskys, but you're isolating the Thomas, Buchnevich, and Kyrou. And that's the core that I think the Blues are trying to evaluate. Where are they at?
And the hard part is, I feel like if you give me that on paper, if you give me this Blues team on paper, I think, okay, well, this team's better than Calgary. They're better than Utah. They can go right up there with Vancouver. Vancouver's got a lot of talent. They just, aren't putting it together because of a lot of drama on that team. But that was a team that made it to the second round of the playoffs last year. I think the Blues can go toe-to-toe with Vancouver on paper when it comes to, their core and their talent level. The problem is it's just not coming together. And this is where the problem comes in, and somebody on the Air Comfort Service text line from the 314 brought up Oshie and Berglund.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, they had talent. Oshie had a ton of talent. He went and won a cup in Washington. And Oshie was good here, obviously. But, I mean, Buchnevich has had years here where he was really good, but it's just not coming together right now. And so when you look at the core moving forward, like, something that Greg Wyshynski said is like it might have to become time to come uncomfortable with some of these players, like in trade conversations. It's going to be uncomfortable. That being said, like with Robert Thomas, I don't think you're trading Robert Thomas. I think if you trade Robert Thomas, you're immediately regretting it.
Yeah.
But Buchnevich, who knows? Like, I think we're coming to this fork in the road where we kind of were at with TJ Oshie, like that, like from the 314 mentioned.
Yeah.
It is a crossroads because you think about some of the comments that were also made yesterday by Doug Armstrong, stressing and basically trying to reiterate, okay, we want to see what we have moving forward. When you are isolating, when you are trying to dissect Thomas, Buch, and Kyrou individually or collectively, it's impossible to really project ahead and look into the future when, honestly, at this point in time, from month to month, really even week to week, we haven't seen them all working in unison, really effective for a prolonged stretch. And I'm talking about just a month, for example. You have at the beginning portion of the season, of course, we understand that Buch was there at center. He has been out now in the flanker position wing for an extended period of time. So it has been a season-long struggle for him, whereas we stress that word patience with respect to a Robert Thomas. He was gangbusters in December. January has been a different story. But on how many different occasions, Alex, can we actually say that those three have been living up to the billing, so to speak, together for this team? I think that's a big problem for so many people.
All at the same time. I don't think you've been able to say that because you had the first year that, I guess honestly it was the first year of Buch where it was Thomas, Buch, and Kyrou that were all performing well.
That's it.
And then you had the next year, which was Kyrou and Thomas and Buch weren't there. The following year was Thomas and Buch was injured. Kyrou wasn't performing. And then this year you've got Kyrou. And like you do have to limit it. We'll get into this a little bit later, but like Robert Thomas had an incredible month of December and then January's taken place. But I want to go back to that one question from that text line asking, does this remind you of the transition from Bacchus to Perron or to Petro? I think this reminds me more of what Grant referenced with the Backes and the Oshie and the Berglund and the Perron. And what I mean by that is we all remember the Blues got bounced the first year of Ken Hitchcock in the second round. They won the first round, got beat in the second round, and I think they lost 4 straight.
They got swept by LA that year.
The next year, they lost in the first round, won 6 games. The following year, they lost in the first round, lost in 5 games. The following year, they lost in the first round, lost in 6 games. In those 3 years, they traded David Perron in the offseason. That was to the Edmonton Oilers for Magnus Payarvi and a draft pick. And then 2 years later, they traded TJ Oshie in the offseason to go get Troy Brouwer. And remember in those off seasons, Doug Armstrong talked about we need more of a killer mentality. We need more guys that are going out there to fight their way through wins. They viewed this and say we need to have a shakeup because it's not working. I don't know if they get to that point because, frankly, the league's different then. Those guys weren't on long-term contracts, and I don't think either of those guys showed the prowess that Jordan Kyrou or Robert Thomas or Pavel Buchnevich have shown. But this reminds me a lot more of that era to where they were like, we need to do something because it's not working with this group. More so than when the Backes to the Pietrangelo. Because the Backes to Pietrangelo, they had the core. They just opted not to bring back a captain that they felt was on the decline, and they had the players in place that they could pull off.
Right now, it feels like they need to do something, but it's so hard to do anything because everybody has been good at times. But it's like nobody can do it consistently. So which one do you get to part with? Like, if you're going to make a big move, it's almost like, okay, which one are we going to do? Because we're worried that we're going to regret all of them. And I was thinking this, Alex, and I'm curious your thoughts. Like, obviously, with all this stuff going on down in Vancouver and all the drama between JT Miller and Elias Pettersson, I saw something that Quinn Hughes was like, they're talking about potentially trading Quinn Hughes. If like, it's a nightmare in Vancouver right now. Who would you rather be right now, the Canucks or the Blues?
Oh, I would much rather be the Blues.
But here's the problem. Like, obviously, Vancouver's problems are well, talked about.
Yeah.
Like, they're out in the open.
Yeah, it's a Canadian market.
The Blues' problems really aren't out in the open. We don't know what's going on in the locker room. But I
don't think it's the same as Vancouver where you've got 2 guys that despise each other.
But at least for Vancouver, they have they have, okay, we have to trade either JT Miller or Elias Pettersson because this is not going to work. Like, we have to trade one of them.
Right. It's an ultimatum.
You're also not really going to be faulted that much when you do trade one of them because you have to. Like, your hands are tied. You have to trade one of them.
Yeah, I mean, even their general manager was like, yeah, it's a problem right now.
Right. The hard part for the Blues is that there's not one obvious player right now that you can be like him. He's the problem, or one of 2
that we don't see.
That of course that we don't see,
and that's where I feel like the observe comment really comes into play from what Doug Armstrong said. Like, they know more than we do because they're behind the scenes a lot more than we are. I would take the Blues situation 10 times out of 10 than Vancouver. I know you got incredible players on Vancouver, but look at what happens. You've got 2 guys that, in my opinion, are future Hall of Fame worthy players in Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes, and this team is barely in the playoff conversation. You got a JT Miller who just put up 100 points. You got Elias Pettersson who's done that. Quinn Hughes who's Norris Trophy can't. And look at Thatcher Demko's an incredible goaltender, and look at where they're at.
That is flat out dysfunctional.
Yeah.
Relative to what we have frustration as far as we know.
You don't fix dysfunction unless you make trades. You can fix what the Blues are going through right now in 4-game sample size. This isn't a dysfunction. Okay, a couple of these real quick. Guy says the Pavel Buchnevich contract extension make him untradeable. I don't think anything makes. But Pavel Buchnevich is a very, very, very good player. So he's not untradeable. He's having a bad year. And I said this on the podcast last week. I really wonder if a lot of what Pavel Buchnevich is dealing with is repercussions from being the centerman at the beginning of the season. Being a centerman, going back to wing, back to center, back to win. Jim Montgomery comes in and says, nope, you're a winger. And now it's focusing back on that one. But welcome to the uncomfortable conversation, once again, that Greg Wyshynski just told us. You do have to get to a point where you look at this and say, like, what's going on? I think Greg Wyshynski's answer tells you exactly where they're at with their players. Like, you heard him immediately say, Robert Thomas, you could trade no matter what. Kind of tells me, back away from that one, ladies and gentlemen. Let's not overreact there. Then Kyrou, then Pavel Buchnevich. So, no, I don't think anything's untradeable, but I'm not going to rush into conclusions. I want to get to that next, because I do wonder how much patience this team can be allowed this season but I was listening to the Life is a Blue episode that the Blue Note Productions just dropped with Ken Hitchcock. And Hitch said one thing about the team that he took over that is the area this Blues team is lacking. And I want to discuss that next on BK and Ferrario on 101 ESPN.
101 ESPN's Blues Fan of the Week.
Congratulations to Lisa Foster from O'Fallon, Missouri. She was named our new 101 ESPN Blues Fan of the Week.
Submit your pick now to be the next 101 ESPN Blues Fan of the Week and take home a pair of tickets to an upcoming Blues game. Learn more at 101ESPN.com.
This is Kevin Moret from Mentality. Men, you're being robbed of your potential. Research shows a shocking 1% annual decline in testosterone levels. That's why building muscle feels impossible and your confidence is at an all-time low. But here's the truth. You're not alone in this uphill battle. Mentality's physician-directed, FDA-approved treatment doesn't just level the playing field, it restores your body's powerful balance. Our patients experience a documented 30% increase in their testosterone levels. Stop struggling and turn this around. Defy the odds and reclaim your masculine edge at mentalityhealth.com/radio.
Up-to-date info and breaking sports news first. All on the 101 ESPN app, in your App Store or Google Play. WXOS, WXOS HD1 East St. Louis. 101 ESPN is driven by Auto Centers Nissan, home of the lifetime warranty and 30-day return. Giving you the picture, the real big St. Louis sports picture. It's BK and Ferrario on 101 ESPN.
Along with Grant Francis and Bradford Bruns, I'm Alex Ferrario. BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. No BK today for the rest of the week. He is on vacation. And then T-Bone, of course, dealing with a little under the weather. Hopefully back with us tomorrow, but maybe back on Friday. So hopefully T-Bone's feeling better today. I'm driving in this morning. And, of course, you know, you're going back and you're listening to the press conferences from Doug Armstrong and everybody yesterday. And you're just trying to make sense of what took place. And then I pulled up a new episode of what Blue Note Productions dropped today. Life is a Blue, if you've never seen it before. Incredible content where they sit down with former Blues players, coaches, front office members, and just talk about their time in St. Louis. And one I thought was so timely was Ken Hitchcock. So Hitch took over the Blues back in the 2011-2012 season. 13 games in, Davis Payne was fired. The Blues were 6-7. The rest of that season, the Blues went 43-15-11 under Ken Hitchcock, finished with 109 points, and was the best team in the Central Division. And while listening to it, Ken Hitchcock was asked the question, what happened with your team? What did your team do to where they became so good so fast? Take a listen.
Yeah, one thing, checking. We bought into checking. Everybody calls it defense, which is not true. We bought into checking. So our puck management became really good. Our checking mindset was, we were tenacious. We were hard on the puck. And the feeling on the bench was if we had a 1-goal lead halfway through the hockey game, the opposition was in real trouble because we were comfortable playing in close games. We were comfortable playing with the game tied or us leading by a goal. And our team changed its mindset. We really valued the things that mattered as far as checking goes, and it gave us an opportunity to become good really, really quick. Like we won a lot of games as soon as I got here, and the buy-in was, for me, instant. And it took maybe 2 practices, and our guys were really sold on the way to play.
Checking. And I don't want people to misunderstand what Ken Hitchcock said. He's not talking about being physical. He's not talking about hitting everything inside. He's not talking about getting into fights. He's talking about puck separation. And what's the one thing that Jim Montgomery has been talking about since he took over for the Blues? The ability to forecheck heavy, create puck possession. When they've been losing, Grant, we've heard Steve Ott postgame every home game with Chris Kerber and Joe Vitale talk about, well, we don't have enough puck support. You go back and look at that team in the 2011-2012 season. You know how many goals the leading goal scorer had on that Blues roster? 24. It was David Backes. Now, the league was different at that time. I'm not underselling that at all. But what's lacking from this Blues team? It's what Hitch said. The commitment to the style that they have to play to win. You've got talented players. Robert Thomas, you heard Greg Wyshynski mention. He's one of the best centermen in the National Hockey League. He's elite. You've got Jordan Kyrou who can score 40 goals. We've seen the shot from Dylan Holloway. But what you don't have is you don't have the Nathan McKinnons. You don't have the David Pasternaks, the Leon Draisaitl's, the guys that go out there and can change the game with one play. So what do you have to do? You have to do what the Backuses, the Oshies, the David Perrons, the Chris Stewarts, the Steens had to do back then. You have to commit to other areas of the game for your team to have success. This team is 0-11-1 when they're trailing after the first period. This team in 1-goal games have not gone their direction since Jim Montgomery has taken over. I do believe what Ken Hitchcock said that really clicked for the Blues back then is where this Blues team is lacking. The ability to recognize that, hey, we might not have our best game offensively, but we are going to make sure that this is a tight game, and there will be puck support from start to finish.
By the way, that 2011-12 season, did you know that David Backes finished second in Selke voting that year?
Yeah, I did.
I did not realize that.
Yeah, and I think he lost to
Bergeron.
Patrice Bergeron.
It was Bergeron, yeah. But to your point, like listening to what Jim Montgomery said yesterday, he talked legitimately about this. He talked about battle percentage, one-on-one battle percentage not being good enough. And then not only that, but the second man battle that comes in after, when it is a one-on-one battle, the second man that comes in, that battle percentage is also low. So this goes back to what Joey talked. He's talked about this all the way from preseason. It's the will versus the skill. The Blues have a lot of skill. The Robert Thomases, Jordan Kyrou, Pavel Buchnevich, a lot of skill is on this team. But when it comes to the will side of things, that shows in exactly what Ken Hitchcock is talking about there and checking it. And I agree with you. Like, it's not always hits. Hits aren't everything. It's one thing to look at. But again, like, the San Jose Sharks are one of the best teams in the league if you're talking about hitting. Yeah. Well, that's because they don't have the puck a lot.
Yeah.
Like
you're
gonna have a lot of hits when you don't have the puck a lot. So that's a little bit of a weird one to look at. But when it comes to checking, and this is an area of the game that's sort of hard to monitor because there's not a stat that you can look and say, he leads the league in stick checks or he leads the league in one-on-one battles. Like, there's not a statistic that you can go and look this up. But when you're watching these games, and teams do track these themselves, but it's not, accessible to the public. when you look at these battles and the secondary battles, the Blues just aren't winning a ton of them right now, and it's resulting in, the other team possessing the puck more. The Blues want to possess the puck. They can't do it when they're losing these battles and turning the puck over like crazy.
The way that, sorry, Bradford, to cut you off, but I just want to touch on this since Grant brought that up. Yes, you can't track it. You can't look at hits because one stadium can give a team 40 hits and the same stadium will give the team 12 hits. The best way to look at that in terms of what Hitch is talking about is puck possession. It's Corsi rating. Think of the teams who possess. Look at how you lost the game versus Utah and Vancouver. They hemmed you in your zone, and you turned the puck over. How? Off of the forecheck. Here are the teams with the best Corsi rating in the National Hockey League, and you tell me if this team is heavy in puck support and turning pucks over.
Let me guess. Number 1 is Florida.
Nope. Number 1 is Carolina, but number 2 is Florida. Number 3 is Edmonton. Now, Edmonton and Colorado, I kind of give them the benefit of the doubt because you also are playing with 2 of the best players in the game.
You've got some outliers.
Edmonton, when the Blues played the Edmonton earlier this season, we saw they forechecked the hell out of you. The LA Kings, the Utah Hockey Club, the New Jersey Devils, the Dallas Stars. Those are the top 8 teams in the National Hockey League in terms of Corsi rating. And what do all 8 of those teams have in common, with the exception of Colorado and Edmonton? When the puck goes in the offensive zone, there are 3 guys on it every single time. And to Hitch's point, this isn't a matter of doing it. It's, are you committed to it for 60 minutes? And until the players, and he went on to say in that episode, the best person for Ken Hitchcock was his captain, David Backes. He said David Backes took everything that he said, was a catalyst for it, basically took the message and told the locker room, this is how we are playing, and everybody followed. Until you get that buy-in, which is such a loose word that we use in hockey, but until you get the commitment to what Jim Montgomery is telling them to do, you're going to keep having these results. And it's going to come down to your best guys. Are you willing to do the stuff that doesn't show up on the score sheet at the end of the game?
No, and that term is as relevant now, if not more so, than it was 3 years ago. We've been talking about buy-in. We've been talking about consistency from this particular group, and I think it's a great point, Alex, to try to harken back to what worked immediately after Ken Hitchcock was installed as the head coach of this group. And Grant, I'm also with you insofar as it's harder to quantify those types of statistics, even when you're talking about, total number of hits, for example. We looked it up in the office before the show. The Blues are ranked number 8 overall. What does that exactly mean? If basically you're a little more aimless with your pursuit, it's about that dogged pursuit collectively of the puck. And to use another one of the coach's words as well, tenacity. Are you getting that on a night in, night out basis? And that, for me, in a lot of ways, also, it basically influences the way in which the tenor that you hope to strike, particularly on home ice. Doug Armstrong made that a point yesterday. I don't exactly know why. We have a sub 500 record right now at home. But at the same time, we know that there are kernels of truth to that, right? Because if you're not establishing that tone in the way that you are able to, not taking a night off in that department as far as the tenacity, that's going to go a long way toward establishing the tone that you need, particularly at home.
And not only that, but the Blues do this at times. But when we're talking about forming habits and not doing it consistently, then it doesn't become a habit, and then the same, bad habits start to leak back into the game.
Yep.
But going back to what you said, Alex, about the Corsi rating and surprisingly Utah being one of the top teams in the league.
Well, look at how they played you.
I was about to say, is it really that surprising? Because every time the Blues play the hockey, even going back to when they were the Coyotes, that team just worked.
Always beat you.
They outworked you every single time. And that you compare those two teams, again, on paper, it's not even close. The Blues are a better team. Yeah. The Blues are a much more talented team than the Arizona Hockey Club. But you look at that team and how much they work, I guarantee you if there was a stat that tracked stick checks and board battles and one-on-one battle percentage that we could see, Utah would be probably one of the top 5 teams.
And by the way, to just add on to what we're talking about, that 2011-2012 season, according to Natural Stat Trick, the Blues had the 3rd best Corsi rating in the National Hockey League.
Go.
Somebody brought up on the Air Comfort Service text line, too, having only 24 goals as your leading goal scorer is why they lost in the playoffs, because you didn't have any offense. You're absolutely correct. But guess what happened the next 2 years? Vladimir Tarasenko and Jaden Schwartz started showing up, and you started to see more goals pick up.
Well, and I would argue, too, that you lost in the playoffs those 2 years because you were going up against Jonathan Quick.
Yeah, Hitch said that in the piece, too. You got out-goalied, which can happen at times. Graham Francis, Bradford Bruns, I'm Alex Ferrario. We'll get Chris Kerber's thoughts on this coming up in about 15 minutes. But coming up next, you send us a scenario to the Air Comfort Service text line, 314-399-9646. We'll tell you if it is more likely to happen. That's next on 101 ESPN.
It's time for another moment in Blues history.
On this day back in 1987, the Blues would take down the Toronto Maple Leafs for their 19th win of the year. A 4-2 final score as Doug Evans, Jocelyn Lemieux, Mark Hunter, and Greg Paslowski would all pick up goals for St. Louis. 2 of those 4 scored on the power play. And in between the pipes, Greg Millen stopping 35 of 37 Toronto shots.
This date in Blues history was powered by Classic Air Care, making people comfortable since 1926. For all your HVAC needs, ClassicAirCare.com.
With the big game approaching us, you know I'm starting to put together some of these futures bets over on my Circa Sports Illinois app. Why? Because I'm bringing in the most money possible. Now, there's a little personal bias here because I got a little bit extra riding on this. But if you look at the Super Bowl MVP, the big game MVP, if you bet on Xavier Worthy to be the MVP for the Kansas City Chiefs, it's sitting at plus 2,700. You do that on any other sportsbook app, it's sitting at plus 2,100, plus 2,200. Those are the 2 different apps I'm looking at right now. So you're bringing in the most money possible thanks to Circa Sports Illinois. And whether it's those futures bets, or maybe you're putting together a 10-leg parlay like you know I like to do, or even if it's the tight money line splits, Circa Sports Illinois is there to help you. They're so confident in what they're offering that they tell you to go compare the lines because they know you'll come right back to Circa Sports Illinois. Also, if you got issues with the app or anything like that, you're dealing with an actual person, not a robot. What more could you ask for your sports betting needs? If you or someone you know may have a problem with gambling, call 1-800-GAMBLER or text ILGAMB to 833-234.
We're right back to more of it. It's BK and Ferrario on 101 ESPN. What's more likely to happen? They'll figure it out. BK and Ferrario's most likely to happen.
314-399-9646 is our Air Comfort Service text line. Our YouTube chat, 101 ESPN STL. YouTube cameras brought to you by Air Alliance Team. Jump in on the Graveyard chat where you send us a scenario. We'll tell you if it's more likely to happen. By the way, Mike Ryder telling me in my ear, Jim Montgomery at 4:15 today. So the Blues head coach will be joining the Fast Lane at 4:15. So make sure you are locked in for that one. Of course, as Jim speaking after the Blues from press conference yesterday by Doug Armstrong. And in about 36 minutes or so, we'll have an update on Brandon Saad if he cleared waivers and we'll head to the Springfield Thunderbirds, or if Brandon Saad was claimed, which to me personally, I kind of find unlikely. But we'll find out in about 36 minutes or so. Fellas, I'll start. More likely to happen. Robert Thomas rebounds next season and puts up 90 points. Pavel Buchnevich rebounds next season and scores 30 goals.
My initial reaction is to go with Robert Thomas rebounding, just because, we've seen Booch struggle, even going into last year at times, which is why, with the talks of the extension and stuff, it was very back and forth for a while. Obviously, the Blues end up deciding to extend him, but we have seen struggles from Pavel Buchnevich in multiple seasons now, and for Robert Thomas, this season feels more like a one-off when you look at what he's done in the past couple years and how dominant he's been at times. I mean, we talked about him, being in the Selke conversation and how he should have been in the Selke conversation last season. Obviously, the talk is a little bit different this season. But with all that being said, I'd lean on Robert Thomas having a rebound season next year over Pavel Buchnevich.
I like the term a one-off because I look at Thomas, I look at his game, I see him as that foremost distributor, that facilitator, right? And he absolutely seems like a smash hit to be able to reach that 90-point threshold or more again. Whereas I look at Buchnevich and I think about really his calling card being that responsible two-way player. And in only one season so far, his debut year in St. Louis, he potted the 30 goals. Otherwise, consistently, you're looking at somebody in the mid-20s. Does he have more offensive upside than that? I'd like to think so. But as far as a surefire bet goes, give me Thomas.
Yeah. You know what? I was looking at this earlier, Alex. It's so interesting because Robert Thomas is almost a point-a-game player this season. He's got 36 points in 39 games.
Still.
Alexander Barkov is having almost an identical season as Robert Thomas. Mm-hmm. He's a -2 this season with the Panthers, which I found absolutely shocking. But I got curious earlier looking at, has Barkov ever had a Thomas season, like the season that Thomas is having right now?
Right.
It's actually this season. He's got 11 goals, 30 points in 41 games. Thomas has 12 goals, 24 assists in 39 games. It's almost identical, their numbers this season, and that's with Barkov playing on, obviously, a contender, a really good team, and Thomas playing on a team that's been inconsistent. So it is really interesting when you put it that way for a player that just won the Selke last year.
Absolutely, and I'm with you on the Robert Thomas thing, but don't overlook the Pavel Buchnevich. We'll get Chris Kerber's thoughts on this coming up in our next segment, but I really wonder if that center spot had an effect on him. If you look at where he's at. So the last time he scored 30 goals was his first year in St. Louis. That season, he had 199 shots on goal with 304 shot attempts. Last season, he scored 27 in 80 games, had 390 shot attempts, 207 on goal. In 49 games this season, he's got 91 shots on goal with 190 shot attempts. That's not Pavel Buchnevich. This is a guy who every season is going to have 200-plus shots on goal. And this year, he's on pace for 170 160, maybe. Don't overlook the opportunity of him to get back there when he's got a full season to work on just being a winger, not a centerman.
Well, and on top of it, with Thomas having an off season so far, that's going to affect Booch as well, playing on the same line.
What do you got, Grant?
More likely to happen. First of all, preface this with last night, Scott Perunovich finished the game at +2 with an assist.
Don't do it, Grant.
You knew it was going to happen at some point.
Don't do it.
More likely to happen. The Blues regret trading Scott Perunovich, or they don't regret it? Does he turn into the next Wallman or Dunn?
I'm going to say not regret this. Good for him, man. I hope he has a lot of success. But Scott Perunovich is going to get this top 4 playing time because they're without 2 of their top 4 defensemen. And when those guys come back, they're night and day top 4 defense. I mean, Tony DeAngelo is playing in the top 4 right now for the Islanders. And like Tony DeAngelo was playing in the KHL earlier this season. Does Scott Perunovich continue to make the most of being a third pair defenseman, which is where he kind of fell short this season? I'm going to say more likely that he doesn't make the Blues regret this, because I think what the Blues are going to get from Cam Fowler and Philip Broberg next year, and honestly Tyler Tucker next year, will be more productive than what Scott Perunovich.
No regrets. At this point in time, you have to say, as his tenure as a Blue came to a conclusion, he had more than an ample number of auditions, and it became a numbers game. As Doug Armstrong himself said after the acquisition there, it was basically an opportunity. He was not going to be back in the lineup for Jim Montgomery anytime soon. You accommodate the player, you tip your cap, you wish him the best, but it wasn't going to work here. It simply wasn't.
I had a few of my friends with the Islanders reach out to me and ask me, what Scott Perunovich is and all. And I did tell them the one thing that Scott hasn't had is an extended run, like, of consistent gameplay. Like, he's had opportunities here and there, but he hasn't had like a 20-game stretch where he plays every game.
That's fair.
And with the amount of injuries that the Islanders have, if he is going to get this stretch of consistent play, I wonder what he does with it, especially in a top 4 role.
Yeah. Bradford, what do you got?
Guys, you know that I have to go to the hard court for just a little bit today. Last night, actually, SLU picked up a nice victory again at Chaifetz Arena on the court. We're going to keep it to the court to move just half of a game behind the first place squad, George Washington, in A10 play. You know that Mizzou and Illinois likewise playing good basketball in this area. So more likely to happen, will SLU be able to make it through the A10 tournament, win the tournament, and secure an NCAA berth that way, or Mizzou or Illinois to win multiple tournament games?
I'm going to say Mizzou or Illinois to win multiple tournament games. And that's no shade against the Billikens. I think they have a good squad, but I do look at how they played in the conference so far this year. They're 2-6. That's not the greatest. And they do have a really good player in Robbie Avila. I look at Mizzou, though, and see some of the victories that they've pulled off. Kansas, LSU. I see Illinois always being a threat. I do think one of those teams or both of those teams could win a game in the tournament. And if you get one, luck might be on your side to get 2. So I'll say more likely Mizzou or Illinois.
Yeah, I think for the Billikens, the biggest problem right now, even though you have seen some glimpses in A10 play, Grant, is that the rotation is such that Josh Schertz has to rely on a finite number of players. And when you're talking about a conference tournament, unless you get the top seed, unless you get a bye, it's very difficult to go all the way through, even if you were comparable from a performance standpoint. Whereas Mizzou this year seems to be much better equipped. I would say maybe even more so than a couple of years ago, the Kobe Brown group, because of the length that you have, the way in which this team can consistently defend. I do think you need more paint scoring options, but Illinois extremely well coached as well. The matchups are such that either of those two programs could make a little bit of a mini run in March.
Let's run through these really quick because we got to get to Kerbs on the other side. More likely to happen, the Blues trade for a superstar or the Cardinals in the next 3 to 5 years? I'll say it's the Blues. They've shown me the ability to be more aggressive than the Cardinals.
I go with the Blues as well, and I agree with that, especially when it comes to one thing that the Blues have working for them is they have that salary cap, so that they don't have to go out and spend a crazy amount of money, and they can bring in free agents that fit under the cap. Meanwhile, in baseball, obviously the Cardinals have just been unwilling to make big money moves like that, so that's why I would lean with the Blues.
Yeah, you can't slice it any other way. Aggressiveness, the key word. We see the proactive nature of the front office there. Again, maybe things change a bit next season moving forward, new regime and so forth. But until proven otherwise, we know that the Blues are willing to go out on that limb and take that risk.
More likely to happen, Blues keep or trade Joel Hofer in the offseason. I'm going to say keeping him. You're not trading.
I'd be surprised to trade him just because right now he's not playing his best. If you were to trade Joel Hofer, although he does have a pretty good record this season, but his stats really aren't there. I'd be a little bit surprised to see them trade Joel Hofer.
Yeah, it's a rare thing to still have a goalie tandem of this ilk, and you can read into some of the advanced numbers and analytics all you want. The bottom line is that even in the past month plus, you have had more than representative goaltending from this team. Don't break that up. Roll with it moving forward if you can. There are other areas to address other than that.
I need to correct myself. I said SLU is 2-6 in the conference. They're 6-2.
I got you, buddy.
Apparently, I'm going to explain why my day has been a little in shambles in the the junk drawer coming up in about 15. But we've got Chris Kerber next on 101 ESPN.
101 ESPN is your home for Blues hockey. And every month during the season, you can register to win tickets to an upcoming Blues game. Enter to score free Blues tickets now at 101ESPN.com or on the 101 app. Brought to you by Ted Drewes, serving original frozen custard since 1929.
All right, we're going to keep getting through the muddled winter here with your heater and your furnace going, but eventually it's going to be spring. Are you ready to flip the switch? I know some people are weather-wise. Here's the deal. If you haven't been checking out what we've been telling you for the last little while, make sure you do it. Get on the phone with Classic Air Care, set up an appointment, have them come out and do a maintenance check on your unit. Make sure you get through the rest of the winter, but also you'll make sure that you're nice and ready to go when you're ready to flip the switch from the furnace to the air conditioner. Maintaining it is no different than maintaining any other machine, whether it be the oil changes or the tire rotation on your car or maybe something else in the house. Maintaining that unit makes sure that one of the most expensive pieces of equipment in your house is still running the way it should be, and it helps you from preventing major catastrophic damage to the unit. So call Classic Air Care today. Get online at classicaircare.com. Check out their 4.8 Google rating. You'll know the quality service that you're going to get. They maintain my house. They'll maintain yours. Classic Air Care. They've been making people comfortable since 1926.
Hear from you. Use the Scott Lee Mic Drop feature on the 101 mobile app. Give us your opinion on anything St. Louis sports with a mic drop.
Brought to you by the Scott Lee Heating Company.
101 ESPN Sports Center.
Still searching for Saad clarity? Good afternoon. I'm Bradford Bruns with a Sports Center update powered by Saliga Heating and Cooling. St. Louis placed veteran forward Brandon Saad on waivers yesterday. If unclaimed by 1 o'clock or 22 minutes from now, the 32-year-old will be assigned to AHL Springfield. Saad hasn't scored since January 3rd. Jim Montgomery's club collectively sits 5 points back of that second wild card spot out west. College hoops, Gibson Jiverson's 26-point 9 outing. Power slew past VCU 78-69. Elsewhere, number 7 MSU took down Minnesota. Kentucky edged Tennessee. Mizzou is idle until its weekend date versus Mississippi State. This Sports Center update was brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling, an independent American Standard heating and air conditioning dealer.
This is exactly where you want to be listening to us. It's BK and Ferrario on 101 ESPN.
Along with Graham Francis and Bradford Bruns, I'm Alex Ferrario. Let's head to the Callier and Thompson hotline and welcome in the voice of the Blues, Chris Kerber. Curbs, apologies on the timing. I got backtracked these last couple of segments. Lots to get into, so we'll jump right into it. Doug Armstrong speaking yesterday after Brandon Saad placed on waivers. What was the biggest thing you took away from Doug Armstrong's press conference?
Well, you know what, Alex? If you go back to the postgame show that we did with Joey after the last game, you know, we talked about there's just, and even Joe said it too, it's hard to put in words, but it is just a gut feeling that you know. After losing 3 games on home ice, after falling behind 2-0 in the first period in each of those games and not being able to come back, there hasn't been a third period comeback for the St. Louis Blues since the coaching change as well. You just felt like something had to happen. And then you have to ask yourself this question. And look, this is the same question that hockey ops ask, that players are asking. Okay, well, what are the options? Well, really, there aren't a whole lot. You either got to call somebody up or you got to make a trade. And you know the trades are hard to do. So the first thing that they do is they sit there and say, okay, what's the move we're going to make? Well, the one move is put Brandon Saad on waivers. Now they want to see Texier go. I thought Doug Armstrong's comments right at the end, you know, a little bit like, well, if I don't give Jim Montgomery too many options, I've got to see Texier play. So I think they really want to see if Texier can fill a hole right now and buy more time for them in the minors with Dvorsky, with Stenberg, with Kaskamaki. Doug Armstrong, we already have seen this with Jake Neighbors. They do not necessarily want to call a young player up in what could be a tough environment in terms of a tense one because you're not winning. So that's something they're going to guard against. And then in the end, I also think he hedged his bet enough to say this could change in a week. And he may look at it a week from now and say, this is a move we have to make and bring somebody up. So we'll have to wait and see. But to me, you know, there were a lot of different things to look at. One of them was the roster construction and just trying to make a difference. And, you know, another one was, I think, Alex, he put some onus on the top 6 players on this team this year.
That was mine too, Curbs, when he was talking about the top 6 and talking about the best players being the best players. And I think he finished that comment saying, like, maybe we have to adjust how we are evaluating these guys in their roles for the team. Can Doug Armstrong adjust the way that you view those guys for what they were coming into the season?
Well, I think what he's looking at, Alex, is you're looking now at 3 coaches, counting the end of Berube's tenure, Bannister, and now Jim Montgomery. Look, you're 29 games into Jim Montgomery's tenure. That's not a whole lot of time. You're not even at half a regular season, okay? But you're looking at 3 coaches with a core group of players that you are using to help maintain competitiveness while you look to the future and wait for some other players to come in and join them. And what he has not seen at all for much of it is consistency from those key players. Now, I think you have to look at this team this year, and you have to look at other scenarios. I mean, you put the pressure on the top line guys because they're supposed to be your top line guys, and you've got guys like Kyrou and Thomas that are real close to being point-of-game players this season, right? Pavel Buchnevich's production is lower than you think it should be. At the same time, they asked him to play center, a position he had never really played for the first 22 games of the year, and had that challenge hanging over him day in, day out, practice, games, everything questioned, everyone questioning everything, depending from one shift to the next. You're not getting, some of the production from Justin Falk, from Alexei Toropchenko, from some other key players outside the top 6. And again, Brandon Saad, being one of them. And so I guess, and I'm not mentioning anyone's name to pick on any one person or to hang more weight on any one guy, but it just shows you that top to bottom, things just haven't been consistent, not just the top 6. But clearly Doug Armstrong feels that he needs more consistent play out of the top six to lead this team to where he wants it to go.
We're talking with the voice of the Blues, Chris Kerber, here on BK and Ferrario. And Kerbs, we kind of had this conversation earlier in the show, and yes, you're looking at what January has been. It was an opportune moment for the Blues to kind of take advantage of their schedule, and a lot of their top guys have underperformed. But how much patience can be applied for the Blues when the same topic that we're talking about this year is something that we've discussed with this team for the last 2 years?
Well, listen, I'm not going to put words into, anybody's mouth from a hockey operations standpoint. Okay. But if I go back to 2.5 seasons ago, when Doug Armstrong decided to just rip the Band-Aid off, move players that can still compete and try to avoid a longer downturn, you've got guys like Tarasenko, Mikkola that have won Stanley Cups with other teams, Barbashev, obviously Pietrangelo a couple years earlier, but really the turn was when they decided to move on from O'Reilly, Barbashev, Tarasenko, Mikkola, and some of those guys. Those are some really good players. He decided he was going to rip the Band-Aid off then and go into this kind of a retool, one that he said could take several seasons. Well, we're not several seasons into it. We're 2 seasons into it. So I think that with the signings and with the roster adjustments, yeah, there was some better hope, but it hasn't translated into consistency yet. So how much patience? I think you have to still keep the big picture in mind here, and to me, the big picture is this. I think you've got a hell of a player in Dylan Holloway. You might have found that potential replacement for Ivan Barbashev. That's a positive. You've got a heck of a young defenseman in Philip Broberg. Obviously started off the season in a ball of fire, got hurt. The production hasn't been what it was at the start of the year, with only 6 or 7 points since then. But you still have a defenseman at the age of 23 years old that can log 22 minutes a game. I mean, this is going to be a young stud without any shred of doubt. So I look at that. Frankly, I think we're seeing some of the most consistent, hardworking hockey that you've seen from Jordan Kyrou in his career yet. That is a massive positive. What he's been doing with Braden Shen and Dylan Holloway, it's not the points as much. You're seeing some of the back check. You're seeing the constant work. You're seeing the hard work after practices. You're seeing the diligence. So, I do think that there are some real positive signs that show you that you are still going in the right direction, even if it is not yet resulting in the consistency on the ice that maybe Hockey Ops was expecting.
Kerbs, there's been a lot of talk about Dalibor Dvorsky, and obviously yesterday them saying there's no real plans to call him up at this point. But I like what Jim Montgomery said yesterday about, you can certainly call a player up too early, but you can't really call up a player too late. Looking at Dalibor Dvorsky, is it something in his game that he has to improve, or is it really a matter of, the team isn't where they want to be at to put Dalibor Dvorsky in a position to come up and have success?
Listen, guys, granted, it's timing, okay? The longer that you can keep Dalibor Dvorsky developing with, the younger players down in the minors, the more he builds that chemistry and camaraderie with Kaskamaki and now Stenberg. Who knows? Maybe Zach Dean, who's just getting back into it. Zach Dean's a real outlier on this right now because you don't know if he's going to be an NHL player or not yet. To me, this is one of those situations where what are you going to do with Dalibor Dvorsky? You hold him down there as long as you can as he's having success. I've seen this happen over the years. I've seen this happen where somebody gets called up, maybe soon, or you bring a call up. The Coyotes did this once. They called up Danny Briere, who's a terrific young player in the American Hockey League. They put him on a fourth line. He gets slew-footed by Ruslan Saleh, and next thing you know, things are in a totally different scenario. The thing of it is with Dalibor Dvorsky, for me, Grant, is they may end up not having a choice. Now they'll have a choice. Like, you could call up Pekka, who's leading the team in scoring, right? You can call up a Hugh McGing, who's had some cups of coffee. So it doesn't have to be Dalibor Dvorsky. But with the move of Brandon Saad, whether he clears or not, you're down one more forward. Okay, so if somebody goes down, if somebody tweaks something, then you're knocking on the door, But again, if it's a top 6 guy that goes down, maybe you call Dvorsky up to fill in the top 6. If it's not a top 6 guy, you don't call him up to play in the bottom 6. So listen, it takes patience. It takes time. And having those guys get some more seasoning in the American Hockey League is never a bad thing. We've seen it with we've seen it with the Cardinals. Everybody goes, just bring the young kids up and see what they can do, right? How's that worked out for Jordan Walker? So I mean, you can really you can mess things up and you can slow things down, and that is why what Jim Montgomery was talking about. You've never seen a guy come up too late. You have seen a guy come up too early, and that is a reality.
Kerb's final one for you, and we always appreciate the time. I was driving in this morning, and I was listening to the newest episode of Life is a Blue with Ken Hitchcock, and he had one line that really stuck out to me. They asked him, what happened with that team when you took over? Why did the success come so fast? And he said checking. He said everybody wants to say defense, and it was checking to where guys were always on puck, supporting each other, winning puck battles, creating puck separation. That's where we felt most confident. Is that what's lacking from this Blues team right now?
Well, he also said the big key to that was getting immediate buy-in from Alexander Steen and David Backes and the leadership group that he had. And that is a major part of it. You've got the buy-in from Jim Montgomery, when it comes to Braden Shen, and that aspect of it. And from a captain standpoint, I think there's more buy-in that has to come from other parts of the leadership group and other members of the hockey team. But Jim Montgomery is pretty much asking for the same kind of thing. There's not a massive difference between Jim Montgomery's ask, Craig Berube's ask, Ken Hitchcock's ask, right? There just isn't. It's playing hockey an honest way. It's playing hockey a hard way. And one of the things that Ken harped about and preached on was that this is a hard style to play every single game. And until we're committed to doing that, we're going to have inconsistencies, and you're seeing that ring true with this hockey team right now.
Outstanding stuff as always, Kerbs. Blues back in action on Friday against the Avalanche. Puck drop at 8. First Community Credit Union pregame beginning at 7. Enjoy the rest of your week, Kerbs, and we'll talk Friday from Colorado.
All right, guys. Have an awesome week. Thank you.
There you go. Voice of the Blues, Chris Kerber with us. And right there, Grant, you and I were talking about this in the office. I thought that was a perfect answer by Kerbs because he's right. Ken Hitchcock said in there, he's like, look, on his way to St. Louis from Columbus that season, he called every single leader and talked to him. And he said David Backes was the catalyst for all of this. He bought in immediately, and then he got the team to buy in. You said it to me in the office. Who's been the best line for this Blues team since Jim Montgomery took over? Braden Shen, Dylan Holloway, and Jordan Kyrou. And how do those guys play? Forecheck heavy, win puck battles. Braden Shen's career is right back to where we've originally seen him consistently. He's puck hunting. Dylan Holloway, you heard Kerbs mention there, kind of emerging as that guy that filled the role of Ivan Barbashev. That line has done it. Who are the guys that we've been talking a lot about? It's Thomas and Buchnevich. Those are the guys that I think you're still waiting to buy in. And when you've got everybody to buy in, that's when the team can go on their run.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not necessarily things that take a ton of talent or skill. It's just a mindset. It's a mindset of being aggressive, being hard to play against. And I think Dylan Holloway is a great example. He's got a ton of talent, and he can obviously score. He's fast. But one of the most impressive parts for me of Dylan Holloway's game is he's just a puck hound. Like, any guy that has the puck on the opposition, if Dylan Holloway's coming down, he's going to make life difficult on that player. And I don't think the Blues have enough of those players right now who make life difficult on the other team when they have the puck.
And I think the problem for St. Louis, at least in the month of January, has been that mental strength, the ability to handle adversity, because when you get down by a goal, when a break doesn't go your way. A perfect example was that Vegas Golden Knights game. The first goal. Cam Fowler bobbles it in his own end, something that you just don't see very often. It happens. Puck goes in the net. And then you get that pass that goes through two defensive players from the neutral zone, and the guy gets a breakaway and beats the goaltender. You're down 2-0 in 5 minutes. The adversity side is we don't change the way we're playing. We stick to this, we'll get back into it. That's what that Ken Hitchcock team was so good at, realizing that 1-goal game, 2-goal game, guys, stick to what we're good at. What I feel like happens for the Blues, at least in the month of January, is when something like that happens, you find yourself down by 1 or 2 goals, you start chasing. And when you start chasing, you break away from the mold of this is how we play. We've got to stick to this to I'll win this game myself. And then that's when you start getting displacement. That's when you start getting odd man rushes, and you're trying to resolve the issues that took place in a matter of 5 minutes. So, Voice of the Blues, Chris Kerber. If you missed any of that interview, you can check it out afterwards on our podcast page, 101ESPN.com, which is presented by Schaefer Door Company. We'll take a break. I get a lot of people giving me some slack because of that slew thing where I misread. I'm going to explain why I am just in shambles right now mentally, because I had one hell of a day yesterday after I left the studio. That's next on our Junk Drawer here on 101 ESPN.
This Sunday, it's the NFL Pro Bowl. Kickoff at 2. Your exclusive home for the NFL playoffs is 101 ESPN. KXOS, WXOS HD1 East St. Louis, 101 ESPN is driven by Brown and Crouppen Law Firm. Love TMA? Then nominate yourself to be the Morning After Listener of the Month. Sign up now at 101ESPN.com or TMASTL.com.
The TMA Listener of the Month Club is quenched by Milagro Tequila. Welcome to a brighter side of tequila with Milagro Tequila.
They are St. Louis. It's BK and Ferrario on 101 ESPN. Let's open it up. The Junk Drawer with BK and Ferrario.
All right, so I had the epitome of a junk drawer 12 hours yesterday. I'm going to try and concise this as much as possible. So while I'm doing the show yesterday, I get a text from Ameren. Power is out, had an issue, went out about 1:30, we'll be back about 4:45. So I'm thinking, oh, bleep, all right. My wife's at home with 3 kids, no power, no internet. Uh-oh. But luckily, I was like, all right, I'll be back 4:45. Girls get up at like 3, it'll be fine. I get home. My wife goes to work. I'm with the girls. Get a text about 3:30 from Ameren. Update on the issue. Power is out. Cause was a vehicle crash. Estimated return of power 2 a.m. I looked down at my phone, and for people on our YouTube channel, you just see what Grant did. That was my reaction. Only a lot of curse words. I'm like, what?
It's about right.
2 a.m.? And so I'm thinking, okay, what do I do? Because, like, from what they said, it was a vehicle crash, so my gut is a car ran into a power line or something, took it out. This is going to be a while.
How was their immediate, like, estimation for it to come back at 4:45 then?
I have no idea. I wonder if there was an issue and then a car hit a power line and it exacerbated the issue. You like that word, Bradford? Exacerbate.
I like it way too much.
I'm working on it a little bit here. But anyway, so here's what's going through my mind yesterday. 3:30, 2 a.m., power's coming back. Okay, well, I just spent $200 at the grocery store on Monday. How am I going to keep everything from going bad for 12 hours? And so I'm like, okay, I've got a deep freeze that there's no power, but at least it's going to stay cold enough. I'll put the meat and the milk in there. I got a cooler. I could put ice with it. Let's put stuff in there. The fridge, just don't open it. It'll be fine for as long as possible. But I've got chicken prepped for that night. So for the next 2 hours, I'm like, all right, let's manage through this disaster. Get it taken care of, at least I hope so. Then it's dinner time for the girls. And mind you, this is at like 5 o'clock while the sun's going down. And my house is getting dark because my entire neighborhood is a dead zone. So I'm like, okay, so I had chicken prepped. And I'm like, all right, well, I'll cook some dinner. So I'll cook the chicken on the stovetop. We'll be fine. I got a gas-powered stove. Couldn't ignite it because without the electricity, the igniter doesn't work. And I could have lit a match or something to try and start it with the gas, but I'm like, nope, not going to blow the house up at 5:30 at night.
No, it's not that bad. I've done that before.
I panicked, and I'm like, nope, not going to do it. So I've got the chicken prepped. I'm like, I'll put it back in the fridge. I'll get a PB&J going. So I get PB&J and some vegetables for the girls. They're fine. My daughter needs a bath. She needs a bottle. She needs to go to bed. So I get that going. Then it's about 6:30. And I'm thinking to myself, all right, bedtime, 7 o'clock, we'll be good. Oh, bleep, all of my kids sleep with white noise machines. It is going to be dead silent tonight. My oldest and my middle, Adelaide and Emma, refused to go to sleep without white noise machines. So it took till about 8 o'clock to get them down. 8:30, I get them asleep, ready to sit down and start doing some work. Oh, I've got no internet. Crap. So I'm doing work on my phone, and then it starts getting cold in the house. And I'm like, duh, I've got no heater. So I'm like, what am I going to do? I've got the girls in their PJs. I've got them in blankets. Like, okay, how am I going to get through this one? So I start a fire, and I'm doing this, but you got to keep the fire going. And this is lasting until 2 a.m. So I sleep on the couch because I'm worried the fire is going to burn down my house, worried that our girls are going to be frozen, worried the meat is going to get bad overnight. It was a disaster until I rolled over at about 2:05, and our power came on, and I'm thinking, sweet relief.
And the best thing is that the entire house is lit up.
Every one of my damn house's room turned on because the girls were messing with the electric. All 4 lights are on. White noise machine's on. My dishwasher starts running. My microwave starts beeping.
It's like Christmas vacation.
Oh, my God. So finally at 2:30, when I get everything settled, I'm like, I'll go to sleep. And then I roll over at 5, and I'm like, time to start the day. It was the epitome of a junk drawer.
Yeah, that's one of those moments where you're like, well, I know what we're talking about tomorrow at 12:45.
Yep. And I tell you what, I was so thankful that, one, I had a fireplace, two, that it was a nice day outside, that we didn't have to worry about it being 20 degrees.
If that would have been one of those days where we had the
last week, we would have been in a hotel where we would have been one of our parents with all of our kids because it wouldn't have lasted.
See, that's my takeaway. You MacGyvered it, or MacGrubered it at the very least. And the only situation to which I can compare it, Alex, and we are at the end of the day still kind of talking about more of the first world problems, thankfully, when you get that text message or the update notification, because this happened a little over a month ago with us. Plumbing.
Yeah.
It's probably the only sort of thing, a delay of that nature. Yes, they can evoke that sort of response.
From the 618, has this dude never heard of hotspotting from your phone and playing noise from your iPads? Yeah, absolutely have. Didn't have a power to charge anything in my house.
Everything was dead?
Everything. Well, not dead. I mean, my phone was on life support.
Gonna die.
But by 8 o'clock, if I put it on a white noise machine, it's going to die quick. So, and I'm also not going to put my cell phone with a white noise machine in my daughter's room, because what do I think a 3-year-old's going to do with a cell phone with a white noise machine playing?
Adjust your fantasy team?
Yeah, exactly. Or pull up YouTube and start watching Miss Rachel until 7 o'clock in the morning. Graham Francis, Bradford Bruns, I'm Alex Ferrario. Coming up next, a little update on the Brandon Saad saga. How does it end in St. Louis? And what are the realistic expectations for Alex Texier? We'll get to all that next here on 101 ESPN.
Jamie Rivers here, and this week I am giving away a signed Colton Parayko number 55 jersey away. It is awesome. Big old Colt 55, that slap shot from the blue line. Now you can wear the same jersey that he wears, and it's signed. And all you have to do to get entered to win this autographed jersey is go to 101ESPN.com or visit 101, the mobile app powered by Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers. you. Text us at 314-399-9646 on the Air Comfort Service Heating, Cooling, and Insulation text line on 101 ESPN. Giving you the picture, the real big St. Louis sports picture. It's BK and Ferrario on 101 ESPN.
Officially have an update on Brandon Saad as the waiver wire is officially completed. Elliot Friedman, Jeremy Rutherford, our Blues insider, both reporting that Brandon Saad has cleared waivers. And for those that remember yesterday when Doug Armstrong talked about Brandon Saad going on waivers, he said that he both talked to Saad and his representatives, and they both confirmed that if he clears waivers, he will go to the Springfield Thunderbirds. And just kind of another nugget on the waiver wire, Blues, who signed the Swedish free agent in the offseason, Marcus Silvegaard. He was signed by the Blues. He was in the Springfield Thunderbirds. He was also placed on waivers yesterday. He cleared waivers, and so his contract will be terminated, and he's going to go back to the Swedish Hockey League. At least that's what the reports are. So, but the bigger one is Brandon Saad. And I do find this a little fascinating because he still has a year on his contract left, $4.5 million next year, modified no trade clause, obviously. I don't really know if there's a comeback story for Brandon Saad. You go to the Springfield Thunderbirds, you play well, you come back up, and then you regenerate your career with the Blues. So there's a little bit of a risk in this of putting a Brandon Saad in the minors, who I would imagine is kind of a frustrated player that didn't get traded from the Blues. But also you get that realization that 31 other teams didn't want you, and now I got to go play in the Springfield Thunderbirds organization. He's going down there to play with a lot of Blues prospects, a lot of guys that the Blues are focused on in terms of their growth to get to the National Hockey League. This Brandon Saad saga, I don't think it's going to impact the Thunderbirds, and I think he's going to play and it's going to be fine. He's not going to be a problem player. He never has been. But this is an opportunity for Brandon Saad to go down and play well for the Thunderbirds, and then the Blues revisit this at the trade deadline. Now, does that mean that you get an acquisition in this? Probably not. But if you play well, the Blues do have an opportunity to look at this and say, let's revisit and see if there's somebody out there that's willing to invest in Brandon Saad. Because right now, nobody was, which makes sense. He scored goals in 2 games, and there were 2 goals apiece. But in the future, this is an opportunity for him to reset his market, and honestly, it's an opportunity for the Blues to maybe get something in return on the other side.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that he ends up clearing waivers. I don't think anybody would really want to take on that cap hit, especially 2 months in advance of the trade deadline, because you want to see if you can get a bigger. If you're trying to compete, you want to see if you can get a bigger player out on the trade deadline. I do wonder though if it becomes a little bit easier to trade him towards the end of the trade deadline, when maybe some teams haven't really hit for what they wanted to hit on at the trade deadline. They're like, who can we trade for? Let's bring in a third line player that's won a couple Stanley Cups in the past.
Right.
I could see that maybe being a scenario for Brandon Saad. That's, of course, if he produces at the AHL level, which I would assume that he will, considering he's an NHL player that's been in the NHL for years now. But yeah, it's got to be tough for Brandon Saad, knowing that, you've had the season that you've had, and, you tried to waive your no trade clause and have the team that you're on trade you, and you couldn't find a suitor. And not only that, but once you're able to be picked up for free off the waiver wire, nobody wants you still. So it's definitely got to be a hard moment for Brandon Saad. And I am curious to see, what he's able to do in Springfield, what the numbers look like. And, who knows if injuries happen, if Brandon Saad gets called back up, we'll see. But yeah, definitely a tough one for Brandon Saad there.
Yeah, well, and look, you're going to go down there and he's probably going to be playing with guys like Dalibor Dvorsky, Alex Santeri, Kaskamaki, Dylan Peterson. Like, he's going to be a very good, depending on if he embraces it, like Chris Butler had this as well. Now, different points of their career, like Chris Butler's time in the NHL had kind of declined, and he was an AHL player, but he went down there and talking with, I forget who was on that team. I think it was Jordan Kyrou that was on that AHL team with Chris Butler, that 2018-2019 season. Yeah, Jordan Kyrou was there. Klim Kostin was playing on that team. Sammy Blais was playing on that team. Jake Wallman was playing on that team. A lot of those guys talked about having the presence of a Chris Thorburn and a Chris Butler around. Again, players that were at different points of their career, But it is a really good opportunity for Brandon Saad to continue to have that positive name out there for you in terms of impacting some of these younger players. So we'll find out. Their next game's not till Saturday, I believe. And I am efforting Steve Konowalchuk, the head coach for the Thunderbirds. Hopefully can have him on tomorrow with us here on BK and Ferrario. But let's go to the other side of this one. Because with no Brandon Saad, this is the opportunity for Alex Texier. Texier, of course, long time with the Blue Jackets, was a second-round draft pick, kind of got squeezed out of that lineup. Blues picked him up. Has had chances in the top 6, but has never really capitalized on it, with the exception of like a 3-game span. This was Jim Montgomery's answer when he was asked yesterday about the opportunity for Alex Texier.
I think there's a lot there in Texier. The inconsistency from game to game and what we can expect from individuals has translated into the team. I don't know if that's individuals affecting the team more, or is it the team affecting individuals? And that's where we, and especially myself as a coach, need to figure that out.
So I don't know what realistic expectations are for Alex Texier, but I can tell you what I do know for a fact. They're going to have their answer on him. I fully expect they're not skating today. They'll skate tomorrow. Jim Montgomery at 4:15 today with the fast lane, so maybe he'll be able to answer that. I expect him to play in a top 6, top 9 role, and I expect him to get 15, 16 minutes a night as a third-line winger. What they're doing with Alex Texier is putting he and Zach Bolduc in ideal positions to say, now we know who this guy is. I do think Texier has a really good shot. He scored 12 goals last year for the Columbus Blue Jackets. I do think Alex Texier has a lot of speed. But can Alex Texier consistently be an NHL player? That's what you're going to find out over these next 30-plus games. The same thing is discussed with Zach Sanford. The same thing was like, you saw spurts of it, but it just wasn't there, and he really never got consistent playing time in the top 9, and the fourth line, it wasn't that role. In that final year that he was in St. Louis, he played in the top 6 consistently, and they said, nope, we know exactly what he is. That's what I feel like you're going to find out with Texier over this next stretch.
Yeah, and obviously, the Blues have had hopes for him to an extent. Like, when he has gotten his opportunity, he hasn't been plugged into a fourth-line role or even a third-line role. He has had time on the first line this season. He has had time with Buchnevich and Thomas, some of the Blues' best players, and that tells me that the Blues really were hoping that he would grab that opportunity and run with it. Now, he hasn't yet, but this is another opportunity for him, and this is also him knowing the fact that, okay, the general manager wants to see me play.
Right.
Like, this is a huge opportunity for me. I have a lot of eyes on me. Now you got to go out and see if he's going to take that. And again, we've talked a lot today about, things that the Blues have been lacking, whether that be, checking the little details away from the game. Not necessarily something that requires you to have a ton of talent or skill or be one of the high-end players of the league. It is things that you just have to be committed to doing, consistently do it, and go out every shift and go and do those things. Go and finish your checks. Get on the forecheck. Have your stick in the right lane. It's the little things like that. So for Texier, those are going to be the big things that are looked at right now.
Yeah, and just going back to my Zach Sanford reference, that final year with the Blues, he played 14 minutes and 53 seconds of ice time average. The prior season, 13:44. The prior season, 12:35. Like, they wanted to find out what he was. He had 16 goals in his second full season with the Blues, and they were like, maybe we got something here. The next year, played him 15 minutes a night, and they got 10 goals and was a -13. That's where Alex Texier's at. He's got 8 points in 24 games this season. And mind you, a lot of that has happened on the fourth line. So can the shot play into the top 9? Can he bring the consistency, which we haven't seen yet? Can he bring it as opposed to Brandon Saad being able to bring it? Because obviously Doug Armstrong, and the way that he referenced it, their pro scouts saw something. You don't just trade a fourth-round pick for something unless you feel like it's got upside. You'll find out the upside at least starting on Friday against the Avalanche. And they didn't skate today, so we'll find out kind of what those line combinations are going to look like on Friday tomorrow when they skate. Graham Francis, Bradford Bruns, I'm Alex Ferrario. Coming up next, we'll get to some NFL quick hitters, including one offensive coordinator that opted to stay with his team instead of go look for a head coaching job. That's next on 101 ESPN.
You can now listen to 101 ESPN on demand. Get caught up on all our shows and podcasts at 101ESPN.com or on the 101 mobile app. 101 ESPN podcasts are presented by the Schaefer Door Company. We're right back to more of it. It's BK and Ferrario on 101 ESPN.
Along with Bradford Brunch, Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario as we get into some NFL quick hitters, and we start with the Washington Commanders. Yes, their season is over. Yes, they had an incredible run with Jaden Daniels. But they got the best news that they could ask for, and that's Cliff Kingsbury staying put with that team instead of pursuing the New Orleans Saints job. And I expected Kingsbury to come back. Frankly, that Saints job is just no freaking way do I want to take that one. And it's different situations because we've already seen Cliff Kingsbury as a head coach, but this is Ben Johnson 2.0. Realizing that the jobs that are out there aren't the greatest, I'm going to stick with the team that I feel like I can have a better upside with next season. I mean, you talk about building off of what the Commanders just did. I think they have $96 million in cap space for this upcoming offseason.
Oh, yeah.
If I'm Kingsbury with Jaden Daniels, who's probably going to be the rookie of the year in the NFL or offensive rookie of the year, this was the best path forward if I'm him. I don't want to take another Arizona Cardinals job in terms of putting myself in a bad spot as a head coach.
No, you know what's nice as well? That the Cardinals are still paying you through 2027, so you can afford to be a little more selective in that capacity. Good for him. Good for the fit overall in Washington to think about where that team, where that organization is now, as opposed to just a mere year ago. And you can go down the list as far as dissecting Daniels versus Williams. Ultimately, who's going to be the better guy? That quarterback OC relationship is absolutely invaluable to basically be operating then on shorthand and, Grant, frankly, to accelerate the development of Jaden Daniels that much more quickly for Washington. And all of a sudden, yes, you're in the same division with the Eagles, no doubt about it, but you can really afford to, you can plan on making a ton of noise moving forward. And maybe it's just for one more season. Maybe it's just that simple. But at the same time, you don't feel that much better about many more combinations, especially in the NFC next season, than what they have in Washington.
Yeah, this doesn't surprise me at all. If I'm Cliff Kingsbury and I've already been a head coach and I was not very competitive with that team.
What?
And now I'm with this Washington team with a rookie quarterback that just had a heck of a season, went to the NFC Championship with nobody expecting them to do that. I'm not going anywhere. I wouldn't want to go to a team like the Saints that really don't have any hopes of making the playoffs in the near future.
How bad does that job look right now?
Yeah, it looks awful.
Well, because
it's
not just Kingsbury that turned it down. It's Mike McCarthy, who was out there in the coaching cycle still, connected to a lot of different jobs once the Cowboys things fell off. And obviously the Bears got their guy. The Jets got their guy. So Mike McCarthy's kind of left hanging. And Mike McCarthy comes out today and just basically says, nope, I don't need to be in this coaching cycle.
Pass.
Which, like, basically you're looking at the Saints being like, I do not need your bad job. I'll wait until a better job opens up. And honestly, good on both of those guys. That New Orleans Saints jobs is not appealing right now. Cap hell, you're tied to a lot of bad contracts that you're probably going to have to eat dead money with. You've got a quarterback that you're paying a lot of money to that you can't get out of. You got no real ideal draft positions. You're stuck.
Yeah, I do, though, think sometimes, like, this happened with the Rams a few years ago when nobody thought they were going to be good and ended up making the playoffs. And then this past year, same thing happened with the Steelers. Same thing happened with the Commanders. Like, do I think do I think the Saints are going to be better and improve next season? No, I don't. But we always have some teams that are counted out, that end up going on these runs. You're like, how in the world did this happen? Mm-hmm. So I'm not that I'm saying that the Saints could do that, but it's definitely not an appealing job. And yeah, if I'm Cliff Kingsbury and I'm established with the Commanders and how well of a season they had this season, no chance I'm leaving them.
I am still somewhat surprised, though, because after all, you're talking about the NFC South. If ever really there were a division, especially in that conference, in which you could engineer a 1 to 2 year turnaround, it would be there, frankly. Now, Baker Mayfield has finally demonstrated his bona fides in Tampa Bay. We know that. But in Atlanta next season, for example, do you trust Michael Penix to make that immediate Jaden Daniels-esque impact for the Falcons? I don't know about that. The Panthers, year after year, did they actually find something this season, this past year, in Young? I'm not entirely sure about that. So I'm a little surprised that it's being met with that much resistance. I also think with respect to Mike McCarthy, we can safely say this man doesn't need to explore the college avenue. He can afford to take a year off. He can wait, because when you're talking about somebody with this set of credentials, 18 years, yes, the lack of playoff success in Dallas, not in Green Bay, mind you, 174 wins, he's going to have his pick of the litter next year if that's what he chooses.
Well, and the other one that I missed this for some reason. The other one that also chose to stay with their team instead of go to the New Orleans Saints was Joe Brady. So, like, what's the pivot for New Orleans? And, like, obviously I'm asking a question that this sounds really bad, but doesn't really matter, because I think you're going to be the worst team in the NFC South again next year, especially for how Bryce Young played down the stretch. What's the pivot for the New Orleans Saints?
Draft picks.
Totally, but like coaching-wise, like you're going to hire somebody to basically just be the whipping boy for the next couple of years?
Pete Carroll would have been perfect there. But
I mean,
again,
Pete Carroll says I don't want to deal with that. I'd rather deal with the Raiders crap than deal with yours.
He would have been the perfect fit. That's the thing. Now you don't have that opportunity, that ability. If McCarthy, for example, is pulling himself out of the running, who actually carries that clout, that gravity? You are running into a shortage of those names. So in all likelihood, New Orleans, a la Dallas, I'm just going to say it, you're going with a bridge solution in the meantime until you blow it up again in a year.
Kind of projecting forward with this, because obviously the Saints job is the only one that's available, and Kellen Moore's the favorite for that, which, if I'm Kellen Moore, I think I might want to stay with Philadelphia too. What's the next best head coaching job? Like, obviously we don't know what that's going to be, but like when you look around some of these teams, a lot of the teams that you say, like, oh man, they're set up for some success. They've got their guys, like D'Amico Ryans with the Houston Texans. That's there. Kevin O'Connell with the Minnesota Vikings. What's the next ideal job if you're Mike McCarthy? What are you waiting for? Because I don't know if there's a team. Like, are you waiting? I mean, Nick Sirianni's not going anywhere, even after, if we don't believe in him, he's got his team to a Super Bowl again. The Cowboys aren't going to hire anybody that they basically haven't had before. I don't think the Giants' job is really ideal. I don't think the Cardinals' job is really ideal. Is it the Seahawks? Is it the Falcons?
Maybe. Let me throw an interesting one at you. Now, I'm not predicting necessarily that this is going to happen anytime soon, maybe even not after next season, but is it possible that one of the more veteran names, okay, somebody who's been at that same consistent post, no, not Mike Tomlin, but rather perhaps in the same division. Let's just say, for example, that next year you're talking about a situation in which a Baltimore, again, disappoints in the postseason. Could you envision somebody like a Harbaugh, a long-time name, maybe moving out just to inject a fresh name? I could envision something like that.
Man, I look at that the same way I look at Sean McDermott with the Buffalo Bills.
I wouldn't do it, but...
Yeah, no, I'm the same way. I mean, you're right, but... I mean, look at us with Pittsburgh. Like, Mike Tomlin's talking about, like, trading Mike Tomlin, but it's like, why? Guy gets you to at least 9-10 wins a season, gets you into the playoffs. Why would I move on from that guy? There's a problem with the roster before there's a problem with the head coach. And I mean, you're right. Your options are basically continue to run it back, which I can't imagine you'd want to keep doing that. Fire Harbaugh, or get rid of Lamar Jackson. And you're not going to do the latter. So really, it comes down to keep running it back like Pittsburgh's been doing, and hope you get over the hump at some point. Or get rid of the head coach, which might also be a disaster in the making.
Did you say Cincinnati, by the way?
I did not say Cincinnati.
I was about to bring Cincinnati up.
If you guys were thinking that too.
Because that's a team that went to the Super Bowl, then went to the AFC Championship game, and then finished last in their division and now third in their division with Joe Burrow. I just want, I would think that Cincinnati would be more likely to fire Zach Taylor than Baltimore would be to fire John Harbaugh.
That's fair. And make no mistake about it, McCarthy isn't going anywhere that doesn't have a ready-made, terrific quarterback situation. Why would you? You can walk right into that.
Yep. Bradford Brunge, Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. Coming up at 15, we'll hit the rewind. But next, I know people are pointing to the goaltending and saying this is the reason why you're in a bad spot, among many others. I've actually got some numbers that show the goaltending isn't as bad as you might think it is. It's another area of the game. We'll discuss that next on 101 ESPN.
Submit your pick now to be the next 101 ESPN Blues Fan of the Week and take home a pair of tickets to an upcoming Blues game. Learn more at 101ESPN.com. analysis and opinion, it's all here on Curbside, your next day post-game podcast with the voice of the St. Louis Blues, Chris Kerber. Catch new episodes of the Curbside podcast after every Blues game on your 101 mobile app or at 101ESPN.com.
Curbside is brought to you by Blue Note Roofing.
Bring out the Zamboni!
Insightful insight, expert expertise, all on the 101 ESPN app, in your App Store or Google Play. 101 ESPN Sports Center.
Saad bound for Springfield. I'm Bradford Bruns with a Sports Center update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. Winger Brandon Saad has officially cleared waivers and will now suit up at the AHL level. Saad last scored on January 3rd. St. Louis, meanwhile, resumes its schedule Friday versus Colorado. Tonight's central action includes Minnesota battling Toronto, Vancouver, Nashville, plus Utah draws Pittsburgh. This Sports Center update was driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
This is exactly where you want to be, listening to us. It's BK and Ferrario on 101 ESPN.
All right, so this is the segment that the text line is going to get really mad at me. Although apparently the junk drawer, I'm a terrible human being that doesn't know how to prepare after my junk drawer segment, which if you missed it, go back and check it out on the podcast page, 101ESPN.com, presented by Schaefer Door Company. You get that on the 101 ESPN app, which is brought to you by Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers.
I will say you should have been able to light your stove.
Hey, man. At the time, with 3 screaming kids, and
That's
it's
fair.
starting to get dark out, I wasn't going to take the chance to set the house on fire. I'm not going to be the dude that blows up my entire family over a chicken when I can just make PB&J.
You know what? Next time, just don't let your power go out.
Yeah, you know what? Next time I'll make sure that vehicle doesn't run into a power line and keeps me out for 2 a.m.
That's on you.
Jordan Binnington and Joel Hofer have not been as bad as people are making it out to be. What? Alex is an idiot.
Homer.
He ain't wrong there. So I was looking at this. Now, one area that they have been bad at, and I will admit failure on this, is the penalty kill. What's the saying? Your goaltender has to be the best penalty killer on the ice? Well, since December 14th, and I did this because that's the time that Cam Fowler was acquired. And from December 14th, remember, for the next 4 weeks, the Blues were the best goal differential team in the NHL. Top 5 goals scored, top 5 goals allowed. But on the penalty kill, those two guys have a .750 save percentage. Their penalty killing has not been good, and your goaltending has been a massive reason why. But at even strength, Jordan Binnington this year, since Cam Fowler was acquired, so I isolated this from December 14th until today because that's when this defense has been put in place. Jim Montgomery's here, Cam Fowler's here, your defense is set. There's no more of this, who's in your top 4, guys who are injured, that's it. Jordan Binnington has the 10th best save percentage in the National Hockey League at .923. Joel Hofer is sitting at the 13th best save percentage in the National Hockey League at .919. These are some of the guys that Jordan Binnington's in the conversation with since December 14th in terms of save percentage. Andrei Vasilevsky, Jacob Markstrom, Darcy Kemper, Jeremy Swayman, Dustin Wolf, Stuart Skinner.
And that's at 5-on-5, right?
And that's at 5-on-5. Yeah, I took away the penalty kill because that's where they've been awful. Here's the one that was really alarming to me. Rush attempts against, and this is on Natural Stat Trick, and this is essentially odd man rushes that the team is facing for the goaltender. He is, double check this real quick. He's 10th most in the National Hockey League, tied for 7th most in the National Hockey League. He's seen 27 odd man rushes in, what is that, a total of 14 games. Now compare that to what he was in the beginning of the season, where he saw 51 of them. That was pre-Cam Fowler. So the odd man rushes have significantly dipped, but the save percentage at 5-on-5 is actually better than what he was in the first half of the season. The first half of the season, his save percentage was sitting at .894. I'm not saying that Binnington and Joel Hofer haven't been bad because they have let in goals that jeopardized the game. I think the real eye-opening moment for this Blues team has been how they're defending. The penalty kill has put you in a bad spot, but then when things go haywire, you're giving up odd man rushes that are most of the time those backdoor tap-ins that we've talked about in the past. Go back and look at that Connor Garland first goal against the Vancouver Canucks. You're giving up a lot of odd man rushes, 26 of them in 12 games to Jordan Binnington. That's not the same as where you were defending in the month of December, where you gave up a total of 8 odd man rushes.
I would say right now, there's usually like 1 goal per game that I'm not okay with.
Yep. I would say the goalies are not okay.
That are on the hook for. Most of the time lately, and this includes the penalty kill, actually it's mostly on the penalty kill, we're having the same conversation that we had 2 years ago about Jordan Binnington. Because on the penalty kill, it's been almost every time the same backdoor tap-in play that basically you don't have a chance on if you're the goalie. So you look at the 760 or whatever it was save percentage on the penalty kill. Well, yeah, your save percentage is going to be below 800 when you're having backdoor tap-ins every single game on the PK. Like, you just can't live with that. The area that I think I would most like to see improve from a goaltending standpoint is the start of the games. Because you've had how many games now?
7.
Where the first shot has gone in on the goaltender.
7. 4 of them have been on Binnington. 3 have been on Joel Hofer.
And, last game, again, Binnington really couldn't do much about that one. It was a 2-on-1 backdoor tap-in. And a heck of a play by Quinn Hughes, too. But I think one of the first goals was a partial breakaway on Joel Hofer. Could have made that save. Like, there's a lot of these saves that are happening early and in the first period that are really putting the Blues behind the 8 ball. And this isn't all to blame on the goaltending. Like, the starts as a team have not been great.
Totally.
This isn't just on goaltending.
And that's why I brought up those rush attempts against.
Right.
You're giving up so many odd man rushes right now.
But if you can get some saves in the first period, how many times have we seen this season goalies just come out and shove against the Blues, and then they have an early lead, and then the game's pretty much over? Because right now, the Blues can't come back from deficits in games.
All 4 of your last losses have come against backup goaltenders.
Exactly.
It's been
but they've come out and shoved, especially early on.
Yeah, and that's really what this comes down to. And by no means am I sitting here saying that all of a sudden the Blues have a goaltender that's going to win them hockey games, because you're right. They're not getting the save, and what happens is when that goal goes in, the team kind of loses it. But in the last 6 starts for Jordan Binnington, the team has scored 9 goals. That's basically telling your goaltender you have to only allow 1 goal. If you give up a goal, we'll be in this one, because you're averaging 1.5 goals per game in that 6 games that he started in. And it's tough because when 1 goes in, the whole focus of the team is, oh, bleep. And when the next one goes in, which in the last 4 of the last 5 games, we've seen 2 goals go in about 5-6 minutes, it's where we can come back from this one, and then that's when you start pushing a little bit too much because you're chasing, you're trying to get back into the game, and that's when the odd man rushes come the other direction. That's the part that I kind of find surprising. I didn't expect the defense to take that turn. I didn't expect, and I'm not talking just about the defensemen, I'm talking about the 5-man unit, because if you look at it, a lot of the goals that are being scored against the Blues, the breakdown starting in the offensive zone. And then it's coming back the other way. Are there some soft goals given up? Yeah, absolutely. The goalies would tell you that. But when the plays are being broken up and starting in the offensive zone and you can't stop that at the neutral zone, what's going on with the defensive positioning? The penalty kill is a completely different story. You've allowed a power play goal in 5 straight games. As I mentioned, since December 14th, since Cam Fowler was a part of this team, and I'm not saying Cam Fowler's the issue, I'm just saying this is what the defense is set as now. The Blues both goalies have a 750 or lower save percentage on the penalty kill. You're not getting the stop on a penalty kill, which is turning into the game of you chasing where you're giving up more of those odd man rushes. It's just this weird cycle of one bad thing leading to another, and then you're down by 3 and you don't know how to get back into it.
Yeah, and this is something for a little while, like that snowball effect the Blues were actually doing a good job of. Like last year, they weren't really super impacted. This is something they did really well under Drew Bannister, actually, is they didn't really let that snowball effect happen. Like, they would get a little streaky at times, but in a game, they could come back in games. The first 2 games of the season, they came back from a 2-goal deficit. Like, that is one thing that under Drew Bannister this team did well, was they were able to come back in games. They had a lot of resilience in games. Right now, for some reason, it's one of those things for this team where when they're down, they can't get out of their own heads. And when it happens early, especially on the first shot of a game, it just there's no coming back, because after that, it's just you can tell that they're in their own head. Like, you can just tell by their play.
Yeah. What was it last year? They won 10 games and lost 29 when they were trailing first. That was last season. So that was the narrative last year. Remember, when the other team scored the first goal, you were losing. But when you scored the first goal, when scoring first last season, the Blues were 33-4-2. That is why Jim Montgomery said, we're still trying to figure out how to handle adversity. And it does remind you a little bit of the 2018-2019 team that needed confidence back to them. And going back to the Ken Hitchcock reference, the 2011-2012 team, he got that confidence immediately from the players because they believed in what he was selling. And I do think there's some issues right now, just as a 5-man unit in front of the goaltender, they're not buying what's being presented to them, and that's where you're figuring it out.
Well, and you bringing up confidence, I asked Jim Montgomery the other day before that Vancouver game, like, what's the biggest area for Pavel Buchnevich that he needs to improve on to get back to where he was, in the past when he has played well? And he said he just has to get his swagger back.
Yep.
AKA confidence. And when your top players don't have confidence, then what do you think the rest of the team is going to feel like?
Yeah.
Aside from that top line right now of Shin, Holloway, and Kyrou, who have been producing a lot offensively, where do you think the confidence is for the rest of the team if your other best players don't have confidence?
I got to imagine it's an all-time low for guys like Robert Thomas and Pavel Buchnevich. I mean, think of all of the combinations that they've thrown out there. That's why I really do wonder, and tomorrow we'll get into this a little bit more, I really do wonder if they break up that Shen, Holloway, and Kyrou line. I know you don't want to, but at some point, the Blues used to do this with Ivan Barbashev or Ryan O'Reilly. Like, when a player was lacking confidence, those guys were Mr. Fix-It, and they would put the player on that line to get them going again. I kind of wonder if Dylan Holloway's Mr. Fix-It right now. Like, at the time, Kyrou was sputtering a little bit. You put Holloway with Kyrou together, they've gone off.
Think about when Matthew Joseph played really well at the beginning of the season. He was on that line with, it was Holloway, Shin, and Joseph, right?
Yep. And so that's why I kind of wonder, when you're lacking confidence from certain players, do you put a Mr. Fix-It out there? And it shouldn't be. I think the reason that they broke up Thomas and Buchnevich a few games ago was because Montgomery said these guys have to understand they can't rely on their line mates to get them out of problems. They got to do that themselves. But sometimes when a guy plays a certain way, it lifts everybody else up. Barbashev used to be that every single time he played. I kind of wonder if they're going to go about that with a Dylan Holloway going into the game on Friday against the Colorado Avalanche. Graham Francis, Bradford Bruns, I'm Alex Ferrario. We'll take a break. We'll come back and put a bow on this here on 101 ESPN.
The NBA is on ESPN tomorrow night. Grizzlies and Rockets. Pre-game at 8. Tip-off at 8:30. The NBA plays on 101 ESPN. It's BK and Ferrario on 101 ESPN. Let's run it back with a daily rewind on BK and Ferrario. Brought to you by Gloria Loom, your home sold guaranteed realty. Selling your home begins at GloriaHasTheBuyers.com.
Today was a really fun show. Bradford Grant doing a phenomenal job stepping in out of the bullpen as Tanner was feeling under the weather. Hopefully we'll get T-Bone back tomorrow, but if not, we'll get this crew back in studio.
It'll be a game time decision.
I will say, though, that the Air Comfort Service text line was extra angry today, which I can get. You know, the Blues, it's a tough spot to be in right now. Cardinals, we all know where they're at. But I got a lot of people upset with me that I wasn't prepared yesterday for my electricity to go out. A lot of people upset that I defended the goaltender, which honestly shouldn't surprise anybody that I defend goaltenders here on BK and Ferrario. But I hope everybody has a good rest of their day today.
Alex, there's just a fair amount of hostility in the St. Louis region. Look no farther than Chaffetz Arena.
Well, yeah. I didn't even get to the line brawl yesterday in the stands.
Yeah.
Man, there's just something to be said about fights at a college basketball game. Am I right?
Come the Billikens.
Here come the Billikens and the fans that decided to throw haymakers. Well, it has been a really fun show today. If you missed anything from our show, you can check it out on the podcast page, 101ESPN.com. Our podcast presented by Schaefer Door Company. And you can get all that on our app, 101 ESPN app, which you should already have downloaded by now. You should have it pulled up, logged in, listening to everything. It's always sponsored by Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers. And if you want to go back through, you can watch us on YouTube later. Our YouTube camera is brought to you by Air Alliance Team. We talked with Greg Wyshynski about the state of the Blues, got Chris Kerber's thoughts on the press conference from Doug Armstrong yesterday. And if you missed it, Brandon Saad did clear waivers, so he will be joining the Springfield Thunderbirds, which I believe are in action this weekend. But as we rewind it here on BK and Ferrario, guys, let's just kind of go final thoughts, big picture. I'm excited to read this article by Matt DeFranks that just put out because he asked the question, what's next? And I think that's the question that really was the premise of the show today. Yes, Brandon Saad is gone. Yes, this Blues team is in the middle of a 3-game losing streak and is trying to find ways to get more consistency to their game. You had Doug Armstrong essentially call out your top players. I think the biggest question that's what's next is that core of players. Is the Thomas, Buchnevich, Kyrou. You have to put Holloway in there now, but I don't think there's any questions about Holloway. Jake Neighbors, Philip Broberg, Colton Parayko. Like, those are the questions that you're asking about this core for the Blues team. And those answers, I think, are going to be had in this next 31 games because the warning shots have been sent. Do the Blues find a way to respond to the president of hockey operations, or are more drastic measures needed?
Real quick update on the Brandon Saad situation, and thanks for Chunking the Chuck on the text line for sending this our way.
Chunking the Chuck.
Oh.
Elliot Friedman just tweeted out, hearing Brandon Saad and the St. Louis Blues are working on a mutually agreed contract termination. So it sounds like he might not report to the Springfield Thunderbirds.
So this one is interesting. I don't know how this works. If they mutually agree to terminate the contract, he doesn't get paid.
For next season. Probably partial for this season. I don't want to speculate, actually, because I don't know exactly how that works.
Well, that goes to show you right there that Brandon Saad was unwilling to go to the minor leagues. And if that's the case, then, I mean, this sounds super negative. That's a win for the Blues. Because if they weren't able to accomplish this and you weren't able to trade Brandon Saad, that's $4.5 million on your cap space next year. And I'll have to kind of go into the nuts and bolts of the mutually agreed upon contract termination. But my guess is if it's mutually agreed upon, you're not paid next year. Especially, and if you go sign with another team, that's why I don't think you're getting paid by the Blues. Right. If you mutually agree to terminate the contract, whatever his remain, I have to imagine it doesn't go your way if you sign with another team. So we'll get a little bit more information on that. But thank you to Chunking the Chuck.
Chunk in the Chuck. Chunk in the Chuck. There you go.
St. Charles, I would imagine.
Say that 3 times fast.
I like that one. But yeah, just as you missed it, Elliot Friedman reporting that Brandon Saad and the Blues are working on a mutually agreed contract termination. So the Fast Lane will have plenty more on that. Jim Montgomery will be joining the Fast Lane at 4:15. Here is a quick update before we go. Saad will walk away from his remaining salary this season and the $3.63 cash next year.
Okay.
He wants to play in the NHL. Both player and team felt gave him the best opportunity to do so. Next year's salary and cap at 4.5 was a big hurdle on other teams. So that doesn't really specify, he says cash next year. It doesn't specify the cap hit. But I would imagine if you're mutually terminating the contract, the cap hit's not going to go against your team if you're on another squad. So we'll have more information on that one tomorrow. The Fast Lane again, Jim Montgomery at 4:15. Huge thank you to Bradford Bruns, Graham Francis. I'm Alex Ferrario. We'll talk to you tomorrow at 11 a.m. Fast Lane next on 101 ESPN.
Open up your 101 mobile app for your chance to win a signed Binnington Blues mini goalie mask.
What a save by Binnington.
It's a cool miniature mask autographed by Blues goalie Jordan Binnington.
Do I look nervous?
Check it out and get entered to win it right now, either online at 101ESPN.com or on your 101 mobile app, powered by Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers.